Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Fell in Love with Pyrrha. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Pyrrha didn't like this. She disliked the bright stadium lights bearing down on her back. She hated the roar of the crowd in her ears. She loathed the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her like a physical force. They didn't care how she felt, what she thought of this, any of it. They just wanted their invincible girl and the sweet spectacle she provided them. It wrung the joy right out of her. Their attention was a yoke on her back, a noose around her neck, a constant and pervasive weight dragging her down with each passing moment. She didn't want to be here. Of course she didn't. No child in their right mind would enjoy this. She was only 13 after all, but she couldn't stop. To do so would bring dishonor to the Nikos' name. Father would never allow it. Worse, he would strike her if she dared to bring dishonor upon them. A small, surly part of her snarled at it, but it was a part of herself that she never dared give voice to. Not yet. So here she was, committing herself to another pointless match, preparing to break another promising contender. Green eyes squinted against the light as she stepped into the ring, weapons in hand. Tonight's arena was much as any other, round and circular, ringed by chalk with a protective field to protect the crowd from stray projectiles. There really wasn't all that much to speak of. It would have bought like any other, just another round in another nameless tourney, whose name Pyrrha long since forgotten, defending her title yet again. And when she grew older, she would be expected to compete in still larger tournaments. To win those as well. It was never going to end, was it? The thought stirred something in her soul. How she longed for a proper fight. Unbidden, she recalled the stricken visage of her last opponent. The poor girl had come all the way from Vacuo to face her in the preliminaries. She was happy, eager even. Pyrrha had beaten her badly. She hadn't meant to humiliate her, of course, but it didn't change the outcome. Her foe all but threw down her weapon by the end. Spirit broken, eyes burning with tears, she had sworn never to fight again. Because of her. No doubt this would be more of the same. Tonight was another such bout. Steeling herself, she forced herself to focus. The announcer had been speaking for some time now, and she'd all but tuned him out. No longer. In this corner, we have ourselves something of a dark horse tonight. The announcer's voice boomed, stirring up the crowd. Hailing from the kingdom of Vale, no one knows his identity. His stage name is Wait. Am I reading this right? Flash? That's it? A note of incredulity threaded its way into the booth. Well, all right then. His name might not be the best, but his skills are top-notch. He's torn his way through the rankings to stand here before us. Let's give him a big round of applause. Lights seared on across the arena, revealing her opponent. The adulation he received was polite at best, lukewarm at worst. Pyrrha took the chance to inspect him as he strode out into the ring. If he was a dark horse, that meant he was an unknown here, someone who had deliberately chosen to conceal his identity in what should have been a private tournament. No one knew his name. Tournaments always had a few of those. She'd not bothered to watch any of the fights involving him, and for the first time she found she rather regretted it. Who was he? How did he fight? Why had he come this far to face her? Clad in a battered blue jacket bearing a golden trim with matching boots and trousers alongside a pale orange vest, he looked remarkably normal. Indeed, he appeared to have eschewed armor entirely, save for an odd ebony helmet. It was a hideous curved contraption of dark metal that turned his every breath into a rasp. Pyrrha frowned at it as much as its owner. Curious. Why bother entering at all if you were just going to hide your face? Was it for the money? 2 million lien was a lot. Even by the standards of her family, after all. More than enough for some to try their luck. She pushed such thoughts aside, turning her attention to his weapon. A strange golden gauntlet sheathed his right arm nearly to his shoulder, bearing a strange series of what Pyrrha could only assume to be dust crystals of some sort. Red, orange, gold, jade, azure, violet. 4 atop the knuckles with one on the joint where the thumb must be, and still another resting in the middle. She squinted at each of crystals, trying to ascertain their purpose, and failed miserably. The sight of them left a pit in her stomach. There was something off about that weapon. Not menacing, just different. And in the main corner, Pyrrha wanted to curl up into it and die. Oh gods, now they were going to introduce her. More pomp and circumstance. Lovely. Mistral's champion. There could be no mistaking the note of pride that came from the booth. Undefeated for 2 years running in the junior tournament scene. The one, the only, Pyrrha Nikos, the Invincible Girl. The crowd went wild, they always did. Pyrrha ignored them, waved once, and focused on her foe. It's a pleasure to meet you. She sketched a bow, as was proper. May you fight well in the battle to come. The dark helmet tilted toward her. Eh? A boy's muffled voice emanated from within. What's that? Pyrrha blinked at him, a rare note of discord overtaking her thoughts. Excuse me? Damn it, I'm tired of wearing this getup. Can't hear a freaking thing. That does it. An ungloved hand reached up and undid a clasp just below his chin. Off it goes. With an irritated growl, he pulled his helmet off and tossed it over his shoulder with nary a care in the world. Gasps arose from the crowd. Revealed were tan-whiskered cheeks, framed by bright blue eyes and a messy mop of golden hair. He looked young, maybe a few months older than her, nothing more, nothing less. Ah, much better, he wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. You have no idea how heavy that thing was. Pyrrha felt the ghost of a smile pluck at her face. I believe I have an inkling. But why wear a helmet, only to remove it now? My old man made me wear it. He grinned and feigned a shrug as he began bouncing on his heels. Wasn't allowed to take it off until the finals. So, he settled down, eyes flashing. Ready to go? So happy, so chipper. Soon enough, that smile would be gone. She didn't want to fight him. Sorry, but I don't intend to lose here. His grin grew now, a wide boyish smile that belied his age as he took his stance. Dad and I need the money. His parents were in the stands? A seed of jealousy took root in Pyrrha's heart. She gazed past him toward the teeming masses in the stands. Keen eyes picked out a man with a similar hairstyle and gentle blue eyes. Said man pumped a fist into the air and shouted. It wasn't for her. He looked happy to be here. Sounded happy, too. So did his son. What she wouldn't give to regain that feeling. She was expected to win here. Nothing more, nothing less. A Nikos did her duty. She was a SLV to duty, shackled to it. Nothing would break those chains. She wasn't sure why that thought made her so miserable. She shoved it away. Fighting was her strong suit, not words. With a forlorn sigh, she schooled her face into a serene mask and raised her shield. Fight well. The boy grinned. Same to you. Above them, a bell rang. In hindsight, Pyrrha wasn't certain who took the initiative first. She shifted her right foot forward, bringing her left arm to bear against an attack as she'd been taught. The boy mirrored her motion, blue eyes burning bright. That strange smile never left his face. His right hand pushed against the floor of the ring, fingers splayed. Pyrrha edged another step forward. The crowd fell silent. The world held its breath, waiting to see which would break the standoff. Then, quite suddenly, her opponent vanished. One moment he was a stone's throw away from her. In the next, clenched knuckles swelled before Pyrrha's vision. It was a very good punch, all things considered. Speed, poise, power. That swing had it all. She got a very good look at that fist before it smashed into her face and knocked her right on her arse. She hit the ground and bounced backward twice, relatively unharmed, but the same could not be said of her aura. A single glance to screen high above alarmed her more than words. She'd nearly lost half her aura to that punch alone. Her mind balked at it. How can someone have that much power? With a groan, she SC'd herself off the floor and stood on wobbly knees. I'm sorry, her opponent sounded genuinely alarmed. I didn't mean to hit you that strong. His unarmored arm scratched the back of his head. Guess I got a little too excited. Pyrrha's heart skipped a beat and, not for the reason one might expect. No, it's fine. The faintest hint of a grin plucked at the corner of her mouth. I was unprepared. Please don't hold back on my account. Blue eyes narrowed. If you say so. Came around to take the next punch head on. Mistakes were made. Pyrrha winced as he rang her trusty shield and her arm with it. Like an ancient Mistralian gong, the impact sent her skidding backward, aura burning as her boots dug deep furrows in the floor. The crowd ate it up, of course. They loved a good spectacle more than anything else. They had cheered for the last champion, too. Until she'd bested her. They would cheer for her here, so long as she entertained them. Until she fell. Milo whirred and clicked to meet him, unfolding from a short sword into a spear. The sight of it gave him pause, and a quick swipe at his eyes bought her some much-needed distance. He hesitated, and she took the chance to hop back. When she landed, she dared to risk a glance at her shield. A fist-shaped indent stared back at her from the metal. Speed and power, then, a rare combination at their age. And yet her arm still ached from his attack. Frowning, she glanced at her limb. It was trembling. She forced her fingers into a first, but still, the tremors didn't abate. "Come on now, don't go spassing out on me," her opponent called. "It's no fun if you don't try." He closed the distance, and they collided again. A boot scythed at her head, and Pyrrha swayed under it to snap a heel into his ribs. Undaunted, the boy took the strike head-on, uncaring as golden aura crackled across his body. The reason soon became apparent as he trapped leg against his side with a forearm. The other locked around her ankle and swung her away. She twirled once in the air and landed in a graceful pirouette opposite him. All around them, the crowd howled their glee. "Nice moves," her adversary laughed and rubbed at the welt she'd left under his coat. "Let's see if you can do that again." Talking during a fight was improper, but Pyrrha felt herself smiling all the same. She fought strong, and he fought harder still. Her heart began to warm to the fight as they traded blows. Here, this was the battle she had sought. Feint, parry, shield bash. They didn't fight. They danced. Cut down at his legs. Block a kick with one of her own. Keep him on the defensive. She didn't dare change Milo to a rifle, because that meant a break from the combat. Unacceptable. 2 quick blows to her ribs. Pain. Gasping for air, she barely evaded a sweep at her legs by slicing down with her blade, forcing it between herself and her opponent. Roll and retreat. Rinse and repeat. Don't let him change the tempo. She never wanted this to end. "You're pretty good," so was he. He was very, very good. Better than her, even. They raged across the arena like a storm, front to back and back to front. Whirling, hacking, slashing and striking, never resting for a moment. It was glorious. Was this what she had been waiting for? A true challenge? An actual battle against an equal, not someone weaker. Then she, not simply a strong trainer, but something more. She grasped for the word as his armored first struck her blade, forcing her to brave it with both hands just to keep hold of it. His strength alone forced her to back away almost immediately or risk being crushed. Green eyes widened as a word came to her. Rival. A person or thing competing with another for the same objective or for superiority in the same field of activity. Her mind rattled off the definition numbly as they fought. This was what it felt like to have a rival. Surely it must be. A strange, heady feeling coursed through her. She'd never had one of those before. How grand. Another spinning kick clipped her chin and sent her skidding to the floor. Pyrrha dug her heels into the mat and raced back in with a cry. He met her with an elbow to the gut. She folded around it, grabbed him by the arm and hacked into his aura with her blade before he could shove her away. Yet again, she pursued. More. This wasn't enough. She needed to fight harder, better, faster, stronger. Someone laughed, a light lilting sound that wafted through the arena air like a morning mist. "It's me." Realization ripped through Pyrrha like an Ursa's fangs. "I'm the one laughing. Am I really enjoying this fight that much?" "Yes," a small girl cried. In the depths of her soul, this was what a bot should be, a contest of pure skill between two warriors. No tricks, no traps, no one intimidated by her father into throwing a match. None of it. This was her fight, and hers alone. Hers to win or lose at her leisure. And for the first time since she'd begun her tournament career, she wasn't sure she would win. The thought excited her. Parrying another onslaught, Pyrrha changed her weapon again and drove the hilt of her sword into the blonde's face. He grunted in surprise and missed a combo, allowing her to chamber a frantic double kick to his chest, then shove off him entirely, using her momentum to launch him away. Like her, he dug his heels in, planted his feet and charged back in with a laugh. This is fun, it was, wasn't it? She never wanted it to end. When he caught her blade in his armored fist, he could have snapped it. He didn't and used it as a chance to drag her into a struggle. Her forehead touched his as she grit her teeth. They strained against one another. Her shield swatted at his face, and he blocked it with his unarmed arm to hold her at bay. That cheeky grin flashed out at her again. But rather than resort to dirty tactics, the whiskered warrior leaned closer. His lips brushed the outer lobe of her right ear. "Looks like Dad was right," came the whisper. "You really can fight? Because I'm the Invincible Girl?" Her heart fell. He was just like the rest, then. He only cared about her fame. Nah. That sunny smile shone brighter still as pulled back. "Never paid attention to all that stuff. It's your skills that matter. Yeah, fall? Who said anything about falling? Scratch that." Pyrrha's heart sprouted wings and soared into the very heavens themselves. She swallowed once, her throat gone strangely dry. "I thank you," she whispered back. "I feel the same." "Then let's give him a show, eh?" Blue eyes twinkled as he released her blade. "Also, duck," tanking a powerful punch on the surface of her shield. She charged forward with a piercing cry and cut down at his chest in a brutal crosscut. The blonde didn't dodge. Sparks skittered off his gauntlet as he moved it in her face, fingers splayed. Bright light flashed before her eyes, blinding her to the jab that followed. Aura squealed in protest, but Pyrrha couldn't bring herself to care. She ignored the blow and grabbed at where she hoped his shoulders were in the haze. Her gloves found purchase, and she reared back. "Aha, got you," she heard him curse. "Oh, hell!" Pyrrha's vision returned a heartbeat before her forehead crashed against his. Her world went white again. Headbutting an enemy was considered a boorish tactic by most. It required an exceptionally thick skull, and if you didn't have one, you risked being stunned with your opponent. It was crude, brutish, not graceful at all. It would earn her a beating at father's hand. Once, such a thought would have had her quaking in her boots. Now, she did not care. Laughter tumbled from her lips again. Soon enough, he joined her. But though they laughed, their bout didn't end. Pyrrha ducked as his fist shot over her head in a wild jab, bringing with it a rush of fire. She felt it sear a black line against her aura, but she ducked away before it had a chance to do anything more. Ah, so that's what he kept the dust crystals for. One was clearly light, the other fire. What were the rest? Ice? Lightning? Gravity? Wind? Perhaps. She didn't think that was it, but there's certainly something about Ido. Her vision rushed back just in time to feel a hammer fist slam into the back of her neck. Pain rocketed down her spine, and she fell to one knee, dazed. Her foe swept in, ready to bring her down once and for all. Too close. An unfamiliar feeling pricked at her heart. He had her. One chance. One opportunity. Now, panicking, she flared her semblance and yanked at his armored arm with it. Not much, just a little. Enough to throw off his aim, turn what would have been a decisive blow into a harmless swipe. She could see it now in her mind's eye. He would miss, and she would sweep into. Finish this match. She would remain undefeated ... invincible ... untouchable ... alone. The thought filled her with sorrow. But her body wouldn't allow her to lose. Her instincts, raw skill ingrained over a lifetime of training, simply would not accept defeat. Nothing happened. He kept coming. She balked. What? Oh, his gauntlet wasn't steel at all. She'd made a mistake. It was gold. Pyrrha realized her mistake too late. By then he was inside her guard. A gust of wind heralded his arrival, blowing her hair back from her face, sending her ponytail swaying behind her back. But rather than finish her, he came crashing to a halt. Blue eyes met green. She blinked, startled as those gentle azure orbs spooled into a soft shade of serene shimmering scarlet. His fist shot forward like a pulley, going for a knockout blow. Those eyes, semblance. Her mind bleated in a rare moment of panic. Has to be, danger, too close. Get away. Pyrrha jerked back with a rare yelp trying to bring around in time to block. Too slow. Metal met flesh, and the former yielded as the boy snagged her shield with his unarmored arm, stopping it cold. Clawed fingers squeezed, buckling the metal in his grasp. He kept squeezing, turning her shield to scrap. A knee slammed into her torso, winding her and leaving her retching over his knee as she folded. Around it, he took the opportunity to tear from her grasp and flung it up over the shields and out of the arena. She'd not be able to retrieve it without revealing her semblance. Pyrrha tensed, knowing what would happen next, but the finishing blow never come. Rather than attack, he allowed her to catch her breath, to straighten and stand. Once more, "I'm sorry." When next he spoke, his voice was just a little rougher than it had been before. "You fought well. Really, you did. But I needs this money for Dad's medical bills." He gave her a light shove and Pyrrha unwittingly rode it, stumbling backwards in a desperate attempt to gain some much-needed distance. Again, he could have pursued her. She was versatile enough without her shield, but he'd seen its spear and sword forms already, unveiling her range from what only open her up to a bruising counter. She knew it. So did he. Her foe settled into a new stance. "I wish we could keep fighting, but I'm at my limit. This has gone on long enough." Foolish. She could hear father's voice reprimanding her even now. The Nikos family knows no fear. Attack. "I had fun, Pyrrha. Really, I did. Maybe we can do this again sometime." Fear left her faltering, braving her sword in a two-handed grip. She couldn't face that smile. What right did she have to win here? Fame? Glory? Her family had no need of money. He was fighting for his, to help them, and in doing so keep them healthy. Her resolve, already fractured, began to break. Because at the end of the day, Pyrrha Nikos did not love her father. "I guess what I'm saying here is..." Her opponent surged forward and caught her by the neck with an outstretched arm, hooking the inside of an elbow against her chin with frightful speed. Pyrrha choked. Green eyes bulged, recognizing the maneuver. He just clotheslined her. The impact alone stunned poor Pyrrha and all but ripped her from her feet. Shock tore through her, and she nearly bit her tongue on the way as down as her jaw clamped shut against her will. Too late she realized what he intended. "Oh, dear. This was going to hurt. I absolutely cannot." His gauntlet burned white-hot, blinding her, afford to lose. Thrusters flared to you, ground. Pyrrha had been right about one thing. There was pain. Lots of it. Breath burst from her lungs in an explosive spray as the boy reared up and slammed her back into the floor. Her word went black for a moment before it snapped back. The ring didn't buckle beneath her, nor did it crater. It absolutely splintered. Shards of molten rock sprayed upward in every direction, some shooting into the stands, others peppering her face. Pyrrha bit out a hiss and squeezed her eyes shut against them, trusting in her aura to hold. It didn't. She felt it plunge, falter, then break entirely. In the silence that followed, one could have heard a pin drop. Her loss came not with a whisper, but a bang. She needn't look up at the screen to know the final results. Doing so only confirmed her suspicions. Her aura wasn't simply in the red, it was gone. She'd burned through it all. By contrast, her opponents lay firmly in the green. It was by all accounts a humiliating outcome. And so it was, at 13 years of age, that Pyrrha Nikos suffered her first defeat. In that moment, the Invincible Girl died. Someone else was born. Someone new. Around them, the shields crashed down and the crowd howled for their new champion. "And we have a winner," the announcer's voice rang. In a spectacular upset, Flash has claimed victory. "Amazing, ladies and gentlemen. Simply amazing. Let's hear it for him." Pyrrha lay there, sprawled in the dirt, and smiled. She'd never felt more alive. So, this was what it felt like. Defeat. It felt good. She wanted to kick her legs into the air and giggle, throw her head back and laugh. Because it was done. It was over. Because, you see, she was free. No matter when or where she competed after this, she wouldn't be known as the Invincible Girl anymore. Not after a loss like that. There could be no denying her defeat. All of Remnant would have seen. She'd lost fair and square. Oh, how father would rant. How he would rage. How he would seethe. He'd almost certainly try to strike her for it. Good. A rare spark of defiance snarled through her thoughts. Let him. This was my fight. Mine. For the first time in forever, she had something to call her own. God's damn it, she was going to cling to it. A hand came down for her, fingers splayed. Jade orbs flicked towards it. Her opponent awaited, looming over here. As she looked on aghast, those scarlet eyes slowly shimmered back into blue. His visible hand became human once more, human fingernails overtaking his clawed digits. His whiskered cheeks became less prominent, the beast receding back into its cage once more. And still he held out his palm to her. That was a good match. As he spoke, voice regained its usual timbre. You really made me work for that win. She reached up and clasped his palm, then yelped when her right leg faltered. In response, the boy took her by the hips and hoisted her upright entirely on his own power. Heat flooded her cheeks as he set her back down again, and she was sure if she looked at herself in a mirror, she would find her pale skin burning ruby red. "I thank you." She looked away, face gone rosy. "You fight good." His blonde brow furrowed in mild confusion. "Eh?" She turned incandescent. "I mean, Nuu." 1,000 tiny Pyrrhas facepalmed in the back of her head. She hadn't meant to say that at all. Bad brain. Her mind was still fuzzy from her bad landing. Yes, that was it. Had to be. Nothing else. "Nah, it's fine. I get it. Winning's all well and good, but you can't win every fight." He must have mistook her silence for his something else, because he gave her shoulder a brisk pat. "Life doesn't work that way. We all fail, sooner or later. That's all right. Nothing wrong with a little failure, because we learn from failure. We adapt. Failure makes us strong." A cheeky smile flashed out at her. "I used to lose all the time, you know?" The tiniest of pauses pushed its way between them. "Say, ever thought of going to Beacon? Where did that come from?" Pyrrha's mind blanked beneath the weight of that innocent inquiry. "Biwa," she managed less than eloquently. Her? A huntress? She'd not given the matter much thought. She was trained to do battle, of course, but most of her skills, even her semblance, translated well into fighting people, not grim. She hadn't fought one of those blighted creatures before. A very small part of her hoped she would never see one in person. And yet, did his idea not have merit? "Well, I'm only 13, but Dad's been training me since I was little." The boy preened proudly, jerking a thumb at his chest. "I'm going to take the entrance exam 4 years from now." Pyrrha chewed her lip anxiously, unable to answer. "What do you say?" Undaunted, he grabbed her hands in his own. "We'd make one hell of a team." The more she thought of it, the more the idea appealed to her. Mistral was too cloying. Everyone knew here. They'd certainly know the shame of her loss in a few hours. By that very measure, Atlas was too stifling with its militaristic outlook and frigid temperatures. Vacuo, nobody wanted to go to Vacuo. With skin like hers, she'd suffer sunburn every day of her life. But Vale, she'd never been to Vale before, and the life of a hunter was a far cry from the spectacle of a tournament champion, which she wasn't anymore. No one could possibly complain if she sought a different career. Father would. He'd never stand for it. But did she have to listen to him? Her eyes flitted to their interlocked hands. Her lips parted. A stampede of paparazzi burst down from the stands and slammed the two of them together before she could answer. A dozen flashes went off in her face at once, blinding poor Pyrrha to everything. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone wanted to know how the Invincible Girl, invincible no longer, felt about her first loss. Her family would be furious. "Miss Nikos, such a close match. How do you feel about your defeat?" The blurry shape of what might have been a microphone shoved itself in her face. "Is this the start of a whirlwind romance?" her opponent squawked. "Romance? I what? No," half-blind and cheeks gone red from indignation. Pyrrha sputtered in the direction she thought the voice had come from. "Certainly not. We're only 13. Shame on you." "But you were holding hands just now. I ship it." Thankfully, someone cracked the fool on the back of the head before she could. It might have been the boy. She wasn't sure. In the corner of her eye, she glimpsed her opponent rival, all but squished against her right side. A wise man would have run for the hills, thrown her to the media dogs and bolted. But he didn't. He looked just as uncomfortable as she felt, but he stood his ground in the face of their onslaught and fielded off verbal attacks of his own. It won him no small amount of favor in her eyes. When the organizers tried to force the two of them apart, she resisted with all her might. Something told her that if they allowed themselves separated now, they would never see one another again. Defiance sparked to life, burning away the last cinders of her old self. Green eyes flashed with determination. "No!" Pyrrha cried out like a child forgotten at Christmas and clung onto his arm. "He's with me," the boy balked at her. "I am?" Of course he was. Rival, partner, friend, or perhaps some myriad blend of the three. It didn't matter. She'd finally found someone who understood her. That he could fight on her level, and beyond it was simply icing on the cake. She might be young, but even she knew better than to let someone like that get away. She was a Nikos, after all. Her father could squawk all he liked about dishonor and shame. He had already taken so much from her and mother. But this moment? This tiny shred of happiness? This she would keep. Yes, you are. She surprised herself with a giggle, pulling him closer. I didn't get your name. My name? A blue eye twinkled over his shoulder as he laughed with her. Sure, it's... She strained to catch it over their noise. This time she succeeded. Naruto, he said at last. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Unbidden, his words came back. To her. We'd make one hell of a team. Pyrrha, she mumbled over the white nose. I'm Pyrrha. They both knew her name, of course. Everyone did. But it was the only thing response her frazzled mind could conjure in this moment. Naruto could have insulted her for it. Could have called her an idiot, a twit or a fool, and demanded that she let him go at once. He would have been well within his rights to do so. She would have been embarrassed on national television, her career torn down to tatters. But yet again, he surprised her. Hey there, Pyrrha. Naruto beamed back at her as though seeing her for the first time. Nice to meet ya. He wasn't saying hello to the Invincible Girl. He was greeting her. Pyrrha. Simple, normal Pyrrha. Nothing special about her. No beast knees here, just normal knees. Heat rushed to her face, and she squeezed his arm just a little tighter as the paparazzi continued to babble at the two of them. And then he pushed her over the edge. Suo, how long do you think they're gonna keep asking us all these questions? Just like that, the dam burst. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Didn't want to. Her mind clamped down strong. Too good. Too pure. Must protect. Laughter tumbled out of her as she doubled over, dragging his arm with her. She had no way of knowing how much her life would change from this moment. How could she? She was just a child after all. In her eyes, she had found a rival, if not a partner. Someone who offered her a way out of the hell she'd been trapped in. A boy who broke her shackles. Together, the two of them alongside two other lost souls would go on to forge one of the most powerful teams Remnant had ever seen. Their names would go down in history, whispered with reverence and fear alike. But for now none of that mattered. There was only his arm in hers. Pyrrha held on tight. She didn't want to let go. Pyrrha knew what was coming next and steeled her heart against it. Her palm betrayed her. Like the girl she was, she couldn't bring herself to let go of Naruto's hand. It was warm and soft in hers. More than that, his presence gave her strength. She didn't want to bid him goodbye, even for a moment. Truly, she didn't. But she had to. She told herself she would see him again momentarily when the trophies were presented to each of them. But the knowledge proved cold comfort. Even from here, she could sense Father's gaze searing into her back. Feel his fury like a physical thing. He wasn't angry with her. He was livid. She'd brought dishonor to the Nikos name. Her defeat so clear-cut that it could not be denied. It wouldn't stop him from trying. She knew he would out of spite if nothing else. There was no end to his pettiness. If he couldn't pressure the judges, then perhaps he'd seek it in court, or claim some manner of foul play. He would seek to slander the Uzumaki's name, drag his family into the mud, and bleed them dry of the lien they'd won. Unless she stopped him. This was her battle, and she had to face it. Alone. If she did so with Naruto at her side, she knew she would doubt herself forever, and so Pyrrha made her excuses to her rival, plucked her hand from his she didn't want to, retrieved her weaponry, and hastened into the changing rooms. From there it was a simple matter of biding her time until Father confronted her, as she knew he would. His pride demanded nothing less. The same pride that had ruined their family and driven Mother away. Her lips fell into a frown at the thought. Anger boiled just beneath the surface of her skin, a frothy tide that left her BLD feeling like a bloody bubble bath. For once, Pyrrha didn't tamp it down. She let it flow through her veins, using it to burn away her dread and fill her heart with defiance. She had the feeling she'd need it in a moment. In the meantime, she checked herself over, dusted herself down, tried to make herself look decent. She couldn't remember the last time she'd fought this strong, nor lost this badly. The last time she'd felt so free. Humming a familiar tune to herself for comfort, Pyrrha removed her circlet and unbound her hair, shaking it loose from its ponytail to cascade down her back in a river of crimson. She tossed her head left to right, then did so again when the weight felt odd between her shoulders. She was rather used to having it bound up, but this time she paused short of binding it up again. Green eyes peered over her shoulder, considering. Does he like girls with long hair? She said the words aloud and balked almost immediately, face gone scarlet. No, bad thoughts, treason, treachery. Pyrrha shook her head anew and continued her hasty inspection. She couldn't take her armor off, dented as it was. It needed to remain for the award ceremony. She wouldn't remove it even if she could. Each scratch and every tear served as a reminder of how far she'd come. One of her vambraces was ruined, scored and pitted where a clod had scorched the metal. Maybe she'd keep it as a memento. That sounded grand. She laid her weapons out on a nearby bench and inspected them briefly. Milo simply needed badly mangled by Naruto. Anyone else would have taken one look at the ruined shield and called it a loss. Not Pyrrha. Focusing her semblance upon opposite ends of her shield, she forced it into its natural shape. Metal shrieked and bent beneath her will, drawing a wince from the girl. It would have to do for now. She could take it to a metalsmith later. Only then did she dare approach the sink and splash some water onto her face. Despite her loss, the girl staring back at her within the mirror looked happy, despite her injuries. Battered but unbroken. Pleased beyond measure. Her hair was a mess in its ponytail, her face dirty and smudged. Her right eye bore a faint bruise beneath it, and her nose was bloodied where Naruto's first punch had struck. A few cuts pockmarked her left arm where some shrapnel had lanced through her aura. Good. She hoped it left a scar. No one could call her perfect. Not anymore. She wouldn't let them. Hello, me. She touched a hand to the glass and smiled at her reflection, seeing herself for the first time. Long time no see. The girl in the mirror grinned back at her. Then the door crashed open, and that smile shattered like brittle glass. Pyrrha, a new voice thundered in her ears from the hall. What is the meaning of this? She took a deep breath, schooled her face into an impassive mask, and turned to face the man she once called Daddy. Focus. She willed the word at herself. Don't stoop to his level. He'll try to drag you down. Don't let him. The meaning of what, father? Caesar Nikos was a great big bear of a man, his once handsome face scarred and pitted by the ravages of combat. Green eyes of unpolished jade stabbed into her like a sword, framed by close-cropped red hair and a trimmed beard. Powerful muscles bristled beneath his cobalt suit, barely contained by the dark fabric. He was a fighter through and through, towering well over 6 feet. No fat fool. This man had cut his teeth as a huntsman in Mistral before reigning as the kingdom's undefeated champion for decades before his retirement. Needless to say, he didn't take her sass kindly. You know of what I speak, he loomed over her, eyes flashing. What do you have to say for yourself? It was my loss today. She lifted her chin in a rare burst of defiance. I'm not sorry for it. A stern hand cracked across her face. Never say that again. A Nikos never loses, she took the blow with her aura and staggered a single step backwards. Once, such a strike would have cowed her in Ascension. Not today. Anger emboldened Pyrrha, made her reckless. She turned the other cheek and spat BLD onto his pristine white shoes. His face turned an alarming shade of puce. It suited him. But I have. Triumph escaped her in a heady rush. You can't change that. I'm not your invincible girl. Not anymore. Father bristled, and she glared right back at him, refusing to falter. To do so now would undo everything she'd said. No, she refused. I'm done, father. The words she'd longed to say for so long burst free from her now. I've had enough of this. I want to stay with mother. Nonsense. His eyes bulged, spade-like jaw setting itself in a scowl. You will do as you are told. We will wipe this stain from our name and proceed as we have before. Stain? Anger turned to wrath. Naruto wasn't a stain. He was just a boy, and she knew full well how her father operated. Who are you to call him that? He defeated me fair and square. Did he? That will be for the courts of Mistral to decide. His smile, slight as it was, proved telling. The courts he had a hand in. I'll have a panel of experts deriding that blonde buffoon within the month. You will back their testimony with your own, of course. That smile turned ugly. He used a trick of some sort. He deceived you. He didn't fight fairly. Worry not. We'll have your perfect record restored. His words made her feel small. No. No, she wouldn't go back to that lonely life. You will do as you are told, daughter. Pyrrha squared her shoulders. I will not. Treacherous chit. His arm swung down at her again. You dare defy me? A hand caught his wrist and wrenched it back. It wasn't hers. I'm sorry, I couldn't help but overhear you. Pyrrha spun to face her unexpected ally and startled as someone appeared between then and a swirl of leaves. At this angle she couldn't see the man's face, for this was most certainly a man. With any real clarity, she was too busy looking up at a broad back, clad in a strange blue-green uniform she didn't recognize, over which he'd thrown a red and white cloak. He stood tall in the face of her father's fury, one warrior to another. Caesar struggled in his grasp, unable to escape. For all his fire and fury and height, he could not wriggle free. Surely you didn't mean to hit that poor girl just now? Her savior's voice was soft with velvet mockery, gentle yet patronizing at the same time. A father would never do such a thing. Bones creaked under his firm grasp as aura trickled away. You are a father, aren't you? He squeezed, and father snarled in pain. Well, I'd like an answer. Caesar bristled. Unhand me at once. No, I don't think I will. Still smiling, the stranger pivoted to look at her. You must be Pyrrha. He turned, favoring her with a fatherly smile. My son was looking for you. Said you ran off in a hurry. Now that Pyrrha got a good look at him, he seemed strangely familiar. He looked just like Naruto, but far older, sterner, weathered and careworn. Gentle blue eyes gazed back at her serenely, framed by long blonde bangs and that dashing grin, yet lacking whiskered cheeks. Curious, no, never mind that. She recognized him from the stands, because she knew his face. Oh gods, this was Naruto's father. She could see the resemblance, clear as day. Her face warmed. Oh my, if this was what Naruto would become when he was older, then maybe she didn't mind. Not again. Bad brain, behave. And as for you. Those angry azure orbs swept to the side to regard her father. You disappoint me. Caesar flinched as a strange ink-like symbol burned itself into his palm. I've marked you. Now. The blonde informed him primly. The next time you raise a hand to her will be the last time you have hands. That strange, eerie smile never once wavered. I am a patient and tolerant man, but if you hurt her, or sage forbid, try to drag my boy's name through the mud. His hand twisted. Caesar screamed and dropped to a knee as a bone popped in his arm. Well, the blonde tittered. I'm sure you understand. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The blonde flicked a hand before the man's face and released his hold upon him. Pyrrha felt something stir in the air as he spoke. Move along now. The Nikos patriarch stormed off, cradling his wrist and muttering curses. Cretin, you'll rue this day. I'll see you in court. I wouldn't do that, the blue-eyed man called after him. Jiraiya might turn you into a toad. First. Caesar moved just a little faster after that. Something hardened in Pyrrha as she glared at the retreating back of the man she once loved. He hadn't always been like this. Once upon a time, he'd been a better man. Before the accident, before the drinking, before everything, he wasn't cold, wasn't cruel. She remembered a man she called Daddy. A jolly fellow who gave her piggyback rides. A man who tucked her in at night with a cup of hot cocoa and read her bedtime stories. A man who treated her sisters like gold. Where had that man gone? My apologies. The blonde offered her a wan smile as Caesar skulked away. I'm a bit overprotective when it comes to kids these days. Even if they aren't my own, I hope I didn't frighten you. No, it's fine. Pyrrha stepped back to regard him. And you are? I didn't give you my name, did I? A hint of genuine confusion flashed through his eyes. It vanished as he laughed and scratched the back of his head. I'm sorry, my memory isn't what it used to be. I've been getting horrible headaches lately. An illness of some sort. Naruto had mentioned as much. Worrying. Just like that, he offered her his hand. You can call me Minato. She accepted it. Pyrrha, be good to my son, won't you, Pyrrha? Minato laughed and tousled her hair like the proud father. He was. Unlike me, he was a newborn when we first came to this world. He doesn't know how to control himself. There was something about the way he said that bit, something that concerned her. He's still learning. I think you're the first friend he's made since we came here. His smile became just a bit more genuine. Although well, seems he takes after me in other ways. Pyrrha tilted her head. This world, I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand. You will. Someday. Blue eyes twinkled with mischief, and he gave her a nudge. Go on. He's waiting for you out there. Claim your prize. Her lips pursed in a confused frown, not quite comprehending. Do you mean the trophy? Minato chortled softly and pulled away. Sure, you can believe that, if you like. She shot out of the room like an arrow loosed from a bow. Oh, hey, you're back, Pyrrha's hand was warm, her fingers threading with his. In hindsight, it seemed a strange thing to focus on, and yet it was all young Naruto could think of. He wasn't sure why she was going this far, but he certainly wasn't about to complain. The moment she came back, she'd taken one look at him and latched on for all she was worth. Fine by him. He wasn't about to push her away. Not now. Not when she looked like this. Together they stood in a waiting room, preparing themselves for the announcement that was sure to come. She seemed oddly skittish about that, for reasons he didn't understand. It didn't matter that she'd lost. Not to him. Silence wrapped itself around them like a blanket, but a warm one. Safe, quiet, comfortable. Pyrrha wriggled out of it first and turned to face him in the dim light. I met your father. Her voice brushed his ear in a whisper. Naruto perked up. You did? She smiled at him. He's nice, if a little odd. Heat rose in the boy's cheeks. Yeah, he hasn't been quite the same since Mom died. Her face went chalk white at the faux pas. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Nah, it's fine. He waved her down. She passed away when I was little. I don't really remember her all that well. His head tilted as he considered her anew. Ha! A small smile tugged at his whiskered cheeks. I think she would have liked you. For some reason, that made Pyrrha sputter. He wondered why. Dad really was trying his best. Poor guy. Minato was terribly overworked these days. He practically raised him on his own, despite having others to look after. Sure, his godfather lent a hand from time to time, as did his uncles and aunts. But they were busy these days, Jiraiya most of all. He couldn't be there every second of the day. Something about a spy network, strange happenings, and other odd terms that sailed right over his little head. This world was weird. Naruto didn't mind overmuch. He'd finally found a friend. That was good enough for him. The grown-ups could handle the rest, couldn't they? A voice rang overhead, interrupting his thoughts. Will the final 3 contestants please make their way to the podium? Suppose that's us. He shrugged into the silence that followed. Ready? Pyrrha bobbed her head. I'll have to be, won't I? He pushed the door open, and she followed after him, squinting against the light. Her footsteps matched his, not in front of or behind him, but beside him. The gesture wasn't lost on Naruto, if only because she still hadn't let go of his hand. Good. His fingers tightened against hers. A small, childish part of him warmed to the idea. He didn't want to let go either. He wanted to hold on forever and ever. Nothing wrong with that, right? The lights flared anew as they walked, forcing them to squint even further. Above and around them, the crowd roared their approval. Together they climbed the podium, he taking first place, and she second just a touch below and to his right. Some stranger came from another door to claim third on his left. He took her in at a quick glance, idly noting her dark hair and strangely bright eyes. He threw a half-hearted nod their way and received one in return. Nothing more. His attention was already elsewhere. Even from here he could feel angry eyes leering down at him. He'd made some enemies today. Of course he had. He'd bested their Invincible Girl. Bah, public opinion could go SCK a lemon for all he cared. Thanks for waiting, brandishing their microphone like a sword. A tournament official stepped before them to address the audience. We had quite the showing here tonight. Both arms spread far and wide, encompassing everyone in a single gesture. It's not every day we crown a new champion. Everyone, put your hands together for Naruto Uzumaki. Tepid applause greeted him. Beside him, Pyrrha wilted, just a little. Naruto wasn't having it. Instead, he let out a triumphant cry and hoisted her arm high with his. Pyrrha's face flamed to mock her lovely red hair. What are you doing? Everyone went istic. Before their response had been lukewarm at best. Now, he felt his teeth vibrate from the united howl that followed. For in raising their hands, fingers still linked, he'd unknowingly drawn attention to their linked hands. That wasn't his intention, of course. He just wanted to show solidarity. Pity for him, the crowd took it the wrong way. Celebrating our friendship, what else? He grinned back at her, shouting to make himself heard over the noise. Seems appropriate, don't you think? Green eyes fluttered in a quick blink. Not your victory? Nope, he grinned. She frowned. But why nope? He shook his head. Her lips pursed in a frown. Surely you nope, Naruto smacked his lips with an audible pop. It was enough to finally crack the redhead's facade and draw a rare laugh from her. You don't do anything by halves, do you? Nah, he waved his free hand. Wasn't raised that way. By contrast, the trophy he received proved something of a non-factor. While much larger than the ones Pyrrha and third-place girl received, it was surprisingly light in his hand. All garish and gold, studded with sapphires and rubies and etched into the shape of a triumphant huntsman, sword pointed toward the heavens. He didn't much care. The real prize was the money. It would pay for Dad's problems, and then some. Might even be enough to keep his friends and family going for another few years. More than that. This would make a statement. So, champion, he wasn't prepared when the officiators shoved their microphone in his face. Would you like to say a few words? Naruto balked, his courage abandoning him for a moment. He glanced to Pyrrha. She shrugged helplessly. Right? A speech? How bad could it be? Reluctantly, he let go of her fingers and accepted the mic in his no-free hand. The crowd quieted, curious to hear his words. This isn't just my victory. He spoke slowly and carefully, reining his eagerness in, just as he'd been taught. And I wasn't always this strong. A slow shake of his head captured their attention. I only got this far today because my dad, Minato Namikaze, trained me. There it was. Hook-baited. He made me what I am today, and he can do the same for you. You probably don't know him. His words echoed out into the stands as he hefted his trophy for all to see. The light caught it, casting dazzling shadows across his face. But you will. He's awesome. Nobody can beat him. Feel free to try. An unspoken challenge for good measure, the gauntlet flung down just waiting to be picked up. Just like Uncle Obito taught him. Give a man a fish, and he would eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, and he'd feed himself for a lifetime. Naruto couldn't quite keep the smile from his face. He'll be opening the Konoha Preparatory Gym next month in downtown Vale for aspiring hunters and huntresses. First day's free. He could have sworn he heard Aunt Rin laugh in the stands. A confused murmur greeted his words, and he used it to full advantage. I'm not too good at explaining technical stuff like rates and all that biz, so be sure to ask him after this. That's him up there, by the way. He stabbed a finger into the stands, and sure enough, the cameras followed his gesture. Lights SWNGNG into the audience where a certain someone had just sat down. He'll answer all your questions. Oh, and ladies, he's single. Minato choked. Not missing a beat, Naruto pivoted before anyone could pounce. But as I already said, this isn't just my victory. An arm flung itself out, thumb stabbing over his shoulder. My opponent deserves just as much praise here as me. He heard Pyrrha hiss in soft surprise behind him, but bowled on despite the noise. She's a real warrior, not some invincible girl. Not to me. She's just Pyrrha, you know? I look forward to fighting her again next year. Although, he chuckled, rubbing the back of his head with his good arm. She'll probably knock me on my butt next time if I'm not careful. Pyrrha made a garbled noise, realizing what he intended. Quick as a flash, Naruto spun on one heel. So, let's hear it for Pyrrha. She made a wild grab for his wrist and tried to say something, but the roar of the crowd and their applause swallowed her words whole. Some rose to their feet. Others stomped out a rhythm. A mighty chant went up, and Naruto was grateful for the noise. It hid their words. So he spoke for her. Indeed, Naruto said the first thing that came to mind. Suo, you want to get some ramen after this? She laughed again. I'd love to. Her muscles were burning. Pyrrha kept running. Sweat slicked her brow. She shook it away and kept running. Her hair was a mess, long red locks damp and sticky against her forehead. She puffed them out of her eyes with an angry breath and continued running. Each breath seared through her lungs like a raging flame, scalding her dry throat. She didn't stop running. Her chest ached as her heart thundered. Incessantly, a constant thud-thud that seemed to shadow her every step. But she mustn't stop running. All the colors in her vision began to drain away. drawn to a muted faint gray. She kept running. For you see, Pyrrha Nikos was not running away from something, but towards someone. She was chasing them. Chasing after their back, more like. For all her speed and stamina, she just couldn't seem to close the gap between the two of them. How long had she been running for? It felt like hours, days, even. Surely that couldn't be the case, but her calves were complaining as if it were. She wasn't going to fall down after this. She was going to absolutely collapse. It would be worth it if she achieved victory. Oh, she knew she'd be spitting and cursing come next morning. But if she could just reach him. Teenagers are often stubborn, and now, at 14 years of age, Pyrrha Nikos was no exception. They say time flies when you're having fun, and fly it had for her. It didn't take much to wriggle out from father's thumb. Minato's threat was all the excuse she needed to slip away. She had a place now, somewhere she belonged. Life was good, and she owed it all to him. She'd grown taller in the last year, filled out a little more, gained muscle and conditioning in places she hadn't had before. But it was her mind that truly changed. Like a fine blade honed to a razor's edge, so too did her conviction harden. In that regard alone, her training in Veil was well spent. She was already leaps and bounds ahead of the Invincible Girl she might have been had she lingered in Mistral. Yes, she decided her time here had been well spent indeed. It still wasn't enough to catch Naruto, though. Come on, Pyrrha! A bright blue iris winked over one shoulder as his voice rose in encouragement, buoying her spirits. You're doing great, keep going, green eyes flashed, burning with inner fire. He had no idea how much those words meant to her. They lit a flame in her very soul and stoked the dying cinders of her spirit into a roaring blaze. Pyrrha grit her teeth and redoubled her efforts, arms pumping, feet barely touching the track and kicking off twice as strong. She was rewarded by a pleased laugh. Slowly, but surely the distance between the two of them began to close. Behind her the rest of the pack fell away. Pyrrha ignored them. Her vision tunneled to a single point. Naruto made no effort to widen the gap, or perhaps he couldn't. Had she caught up to him at last? Was that concern on his brow? Hope flared to life, and with one last desperate burst, she poured on the speed. Voices cheered her on from the sidelines. His uncles and aunt, no doubt. Get him! You're so close. Come on, Pyrrha, you've got this. Sock that cheeky bstrd once for me. And wahaha, brilliant, I told you she'd catch him, all according to Planac. Someone doubled over as an elbow slammed into their lower torso. Don't cackle, Obito. You sound like a movie villain. Damn it, Kakashi, why is always the ribs? Rin rolled her eyes. Boys. Then they were gone as she raced past them. Pyrrha didn't have the energy to shake her head at the trio's antics, but she did manage a rueful chuckle all the same. Naruto's family was mad. Not angry, of course, but not quite sane either. That was the impression they gave her. They were a tightly knit group of individuals who kept to themselves. Yet they accepted her with open arms. At least they didn't tease her like Jiraiya. No doubt he would have much to say if he saw the look on her face right now. The thought lent Pyrrha strength. She kept running. Neck and neck now. An elbow brushed his, and she began to pass him on the inside of the track. Naruto craned his neck in her direction. Those blazing blue eyes, already bright to begin with, widened now in surprise. But only for a moment. A wild grin tore across his face, dimpling those whiskered cheeks of his. Now that's more like it. His smile caused her heart to skip a beat. Of course it did. She'd fallen in love. The notion caused Pyrrha to miss a step, and nearly cost her the ground she'd gained. It was only an ironclad sense of self-control that kept her running forward. Naruto saw it and matched her step for step, and she was all too happy to keep pace with him. Love. Such a strange feeling. She didn't know when, where, how, or why, only that it had happened over the last year or so. She had fallen for him, so slowly, that she hadn't realized it until this very moment. Once, such a realization would have startled her, galled her at the very least. Now, a small smile plucked at the corner of her mouth as they ran side by side. Love. That sounded rather grand. Someone who didn't give a fig for her fame. Someone who understood her. Someone who pushed her to better than she was. Could she love such a person? Could she love Naruto? Pyrrha wanted to try. No, she quickly rebuked herself. Do or do not, there is no try. You're better than that. Don't put yourself down. A Nikos conquered, after all. Speaking of which, on a whim she reached out and grabbed at Naruto's hand as they ran. She connected. Her fingers found his and threaded against his palm. Her partner blinked, but didn't slow in the least. He did not balk, he did not jump or even stutter. He simply smiled and kept running, matching her as easily as breathing. A few wolf whistles greeted the sight. Pyrrha flushed to the very roots of her hair, but didn't let go. When he lengthened his stride, so did Pyrrha. She met him pace for pace now, determined not to be left behind. They ran in tandem, one mind, one body, one soul. It spoke to something deep in the core of her very being, and she felt a small, satisfied smile pluck at the corner of her mouth. Ahead of them, the finish line awaited. The other runners had been left in the dust. There was no one to challenge them. Victory was theirs. Pyrrha never saw the scarlet streak round the bend behind them until it was too late. She certainly heard something, though. It almost sounded like Luak Awut beside her. Naruto sputtered, but he instinctively raised his arm all the same as someone dove between them. Pyrrha mirrored the motion seamlessly, lifting their linked hands high as someone raced through the slim gap they made. Then past them, both teens coughed as a cloud of rose petals slapped them in the face. Their challenger found the finish line first and hurtled past it with a squeak before they managed to dig their sneakers in and bleed off their momentum successfully. And time, just ahead of them, Minato hit the stopwatch as the girl skidded to a halt. "Well done, Miss Rose." He granted her a careworn smile and checked her time. "That's a new record. Take a breather by the bleachers." Silver eyes danced with glee. "Yay," Pyrrha caught a glimpse of silver eyes and dark hair before the girls zipped away again. She and Naruto finally crossed the finish line 5 seconds later. To Pyrrha, it felt like an eternity. Her pride rankled a little, bristling at having been bested so easily. She couldn't speak to the state of her partner, but he looked much the same. Damn it, where did she come from? Naruto let go of her hand and sprawled on the ground with a laugh. What the hell are they feeding that girl? Pure sugar. Looks like it. Pyrrha slammed down on the mat beside him, gasping out a giggle of her own. Speed semblances just aren't fair. Hey, now. A new voice interjected. That's my little sis you're talking about. Be nice. Naruto groaned and rolled over. Was that now? Pyrrha did the same and found herself gazing up into a pair of lovely lilac eyes flamed by wild blonde hair and a cheeky grin. She must have stumbled her way across the finish while they rested. Blast it, she looked well fit. A seed of something unpleasant began to grow in her chest. It took root as the newcomer flopped down beside Naruto. "Yang Xiaolong, nice to meet ya." "Oh, hey, I remember you. You're the slowpoke." Lilac eyes flashed red. "Hey, I nearly caught you too that time." "Didn't see ya." Pyrrha's brow knit in consternation. His eyes followed her. She wanted him to look at her like that. Pushing such notions away, she frowned and tried to busy herself with other thoughts as the two babbled happily. Minato's gym, or Leaf Gym as many folk had taken to calling it as days went by, was outfitted with everything one might come to expect from a proper gym catered to aspiring huntsmen and huntresses. Pyrrha tended to disagree with that assessment. If anything, it exceeded her expectations. Grand without being arrogant, yet humble without servility, it was easily as large as a townhouse. Clearly the minds behind this marvel had put in a great deal of thought and hard work before they'd laid the foundation. She had been one of its very first students. She had seen this place from the first, and she had realized what it would become. More applicants signed on every year. At present they had a healthy core of nearly 50 wood hunters and huntresses. It was a promising sign. Beacon's headmaster had been known to visit a time or two, scouting for talent. She'd spoken to him once. He seemed a decent enough sort and more than happy to have them in Beacon. He'd even offered to let them attend a year early if they wished it. If only Minato would let them. Sadly, it didn't seem he would. That said, Naruto's father seemed to favor caution as much as he did blue and green. Even their gym uniforms, everyone symbolized such. A green tank top and blue slacks with a red stripe running the length of the latter. Pyrrha had asked about it once. He claimed the vibrant hues reminded him of home. An odd turn of phrase, but she'd not thought to press him on it. He'd given her so much already. She would not risk it by prying into his personal life. If the old man wanted to keep secrets, they were his to keep, not hers. Right now, she was more focused on the fact that someone had intruded into their happy little dynamic. She wasn't sure what to make of that. No, wait, she did. She didn't like it. Did she have any right to be jealous? Should she? He wasn't even hers. It didn't matter. Pyrrha steeled her heart and shook her head, Brad thrashing behind her. Back. Ruby didn't matter. Yang didn't matter. They had Beacon in 3 years' time, and the chances of meeting them there were too slim to be of any consequence. More laughter spilled from the sidelines. The adults had taken an interest in their little altercation. Minato was looking their way with a curious gleam in his eye. Naruto, as ever, saved her from their questions when staggered upright and raised his fists. Ready for round 2? A sudden bout of impish girlishness shot through Pyrrha's heart as she sprang to her feet, and if she happened to nudge Yang aside in the doing, well, she'd never tell. Catch me if you can. With a laugh, her partner gave chase. Someday, they would make one hell of a team. But that day was not yet here. Happy birthday, Pyrrha. There was just something about surprise parties that made you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Truly, it was a feeling beyond compare. Pyrrha certainly thought so. She'd never been the recipient of one before. Back home, such festivities were tame at the best. Father had never been one for frivolity, claiming such time was better spent training. Mother wasn't around, and she held no siblings to speak of. Before this, birthdays had ever been a lonely affair. Try telling that to Minato. She certainly hadn't expected this. Pyrrha felt her face flame to match her hair. What is this? I thought that would be obvious. Surprised? Naruto laughed as he slung an arm around her shoulders. I had to keep you out of the house all day for them to set this up. Happy 15th birthday. Ostensibly, Pyrrha knew she should smile, that she should bow and smile and thank everyone involved in this madness. Instead, her legs betrayed her. Every muscle in her body locked up, leaving her unable to cross the threshold. In the end, Naruto had to frog march her through the door and force her to sit at the table. Even then, she couldn't quite bring herself to react coherently. Her eyes widened, taking in the glorious sprawl before her. Green eyes widened as a chorus of happy voices greeted her and Naruto, rising like a roaring tide. It sounded like he'd stuffed half the leaf gem into their home. Colorful streamers lay scattered about, with a sea of green and red and bronze ooze stretching toward the ceiling as far as the eye could see. And below that, a swarm of familiar faces she knew all too well. Everyone was here. There was Ruby near the end of the table, pleased as punch. Yang had an arm around her as she tousled her sister's hair. And of course one couldn't forget the rest. Coco tilted her shades down just a hair as she pumped a fist into the air, the older girl's dark eyes dancing with thinly veiled mirth. She winked and mouthed 2 words. Good luck. Pyrrha sputtered and looked away as their resident brunette sashayed away. If Coco was here, doubt the Malachite sisters were lurking about somewhere too, cheeky devils that they were. A flicker of red and white in the crowd caught her eye. There, Naruto had made more friends than she cared to admit. Why were almost all of them girls? The thought stung a little. From here she could see Cardin lounging near the couch with Dove and Sky. Sure enough, the big brute saw them and flashed a cheery wave in Naruto's direction. The blonde returned it. Why he got on with those 3 she'd never understand. Supposedly they'd gotten a bit nice since he'd thrashed them in the ring, but Pyrrha just didn't see it. At least John was nice. A bit weak perhaps, but he made up for that with singular enthusiasm and a rare determination to improve. In another life, she might have fallen for him. When the cake came, Pyrrha was almost grateful for the distraction. She gazed longingly at the confectionery treat, but more so at the candles upon than anything else. Uncle Obito laid it out for her, made some silly comment and tousled her hair, but she barely heard him. 15. She was still gangling in some ways, but she became more sure-footed with each passing day. She'd begun to fill out in other ways, so much so that Aunt Rin had promised to take her out for new armor soon. Still, 15, where had all the time gone? Surrounded by friends and family, Pyrrha suddenly felt alone, as though caught in a waking dream. Sometimes she wondered if she was a coward, that by not stating her intentions to Naruto outright she was sparing herself as much as she was him. They couldn't dance around this forever. She knew it. So did he. In 2 years, they would attend Beacon. After that came the rest of their lives. And then? It terrified her. She couldn't imagine a life without Naruto now. Lover was a powerful thing, but that made it dangerous. For if love was powerful, then it was also a weakness. But it was one she couldn't do without. To simply cut Naruto, much less his family, out of her life now was impossible, for he had woven himself into the very fabric of her life. To root him out now would destroy her, and quite possibly him. "What's your wish?" he asked her suddenly. Pyrrha already had it. She was just too afraid to seize it. She couldn't ask for anything more. Her inner demons wouldn't let her. The champion blew out the candles and tried to lose herself into chaos that followed. Pyrrha dreaded the passing of time, for she knew what was coming. Yet she found herself unable to act all the same. 3 months became 6, then 9, now 12. Her 16th birthday came and went. She clung to her happy life, desperate to preserve what she had even as it slipped away from her. Beacon crept ever closer, the distant specter of her future growing nearer every day. And she still couldn't tell him. She wanted to, she longed to, she needed to, but every time she tried, her nerve failed her. And so a coward she remained. She wanted to change. And one day, the gods heard her prayers. No, not the gods. He answered them. Naruto wasn't a brave person. Oh, he could walk the walk and talk the talk with the best of them. But at the end of the day, he was something of a coward. He admitted it freely. He wasn't proud of said cowardice and tried not to be, make no mistake. But he simply wasn't as fearless as he let others believe. He was strong when Pyrrha was weak, because he had to be brave when she wasn't, bold when she couldn't be. The reverse also applied, of course. They knew one another well enough by now to shore up their weaknesses. They completed one another. He knew when something bothered her, and the same was true of her. Which was why he knew when they crossed blades in the gym one afternoon, felt the hesitation in her sword. Blue eyes widened. Her arm was trembling. Pyrrha never trembled. Not in a fight. Never in the gym. No matter what she might be feeling, she never let her feelings get in the way of a good fight. Not anymore, so why now? Naruto frowned at it and ducked a clumsy swipe. Something's bothering you. Parry, whirl, riposte. No. Her smile fractured a bit as he completed his combo and forced her back a step. Then 2. Now 3. I'm fine. You're not. Her sword snapped into a spear, then moved at his legs, forcing him to disengage and leap away lest he be swept off his feet. You're lying. The fracture became a break. Something tightened in her expression, and she missed her chance to pursue. Naruto didn't. His gauntlet barked a fiery dust round point blank, forcing her to hunker down behind her shield. Pyrrha was often like that in life too, always hiding behind something, always concealing how she really felt. He hated it. She shouldn't have to hide her true self from others in public. The Pyrrha he knew wouldn't stand for this wishy-washy behavior. If he left an opening, she'd punish him for it. Not whatever this was. Stop that, he snapped, seeking his arm. You'll never win a fight if you run and hide. Jade orbs narrowed. I'm not hiding. Could have fooled me. His fist smashed down on her shield with sound and aplomb, leaving a fist-dented impression in its wake. Pyrrha skidded back. Once again, she failed to attack. An irritated Naruto gave chase instead, and sure enough, that bulwark came up again. He wasn't having it. Clenched knuckles crashed down and wailed on her guard, hammering blow after blow against her defense until it buckled, and she dropped to a knee. Wasted and gasping for air, she tried to stand and failed. Look, I'll be blunt. He scowled down at her. You need to be more selfish, Pyrrha. She looked away with a scowl. You say that, but a Nikos shouldn't. Nope. He reached out and flicked her forehead, cutting her short. That's your father talking. I ain't talking to a Nikos. When she opened her mouth to protest, he flicked her again. I'm talking to Pyrrha, my best friend, my partner. Have you seen her? He seeked at his head like a curious fox. She's gone missing. Want to help me find her? Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't rise to the bait. Strong way it was. Then Naruto shook his head and ripped Lightbringer his gauntlet from his arm. A flick of his wrist cast it down to the mat with a harsh thud. Pyrrha balked. He didn't stop there. Firm thumbs hooked into the straps of his light armor and cast that down too. Piece by piece it fell away, leaving him vulnerable once more. Exposed. Aura or not, if she hit him now, it would hurt. And still she blinked at him. What are you doing? Knocking this nonsense out of you. His fists came up, and he took on a boxing stance. Now come at me. Now? There it was again. That DMN hesitation. The fear that he needed to root out once and for all. With my weapon, I'll hurt you. Life hurts, Pyrrha. He began to bounce in place, bounding from foot to foot until his legs became little more than a blur. You can either roll over and take it, or you can fight back. That was the way of the world. Family was all well and good, but there was a time when you had to take a stand for something. Come on. He spread his arms. Come at me. I'll annihilate all that fear and hesitation. The ghost of a smile crossed her pale face. I don't deserve you. He grinned right back. If anything, I don't deserve you. She chucked her armor and weapons aside. Silence filled the gym. Others were watching. Neither paid any heed to it. I'm not the best when it comes to unarmed combat, she confessed. What if I make a fool of myself? Neither am I. That's what makes it exciting. Besides, we can be fools together. He began to circle her, forcing her gaze to follow him lest she lose. Everyone says your weapons are your life. And they are. But your body is a temple. Take care of it. He flicked a jab at her face, and she jerked back like a skittish hare. Protect it. Another punch. She managed to block this one. Learn to fight with a weapon if you like, but learn to carry on without one. You never know when you might have to. She winced. I'm really no good at this. Naruto moved in again. Clenched knuckles cut across Pyrrha's right cheek, opening a thin cut there as she performed a narrow dodge. She hit the mat in a tumble, and he stomped down after her, driving an elbow into her ribs. Her knee cracked off against his shin, but he grunted and kicked her away. It felt cruel. He hated it. It was necessary. That's not the Pyrrha I want to see. He snarled at her as she clambered upright. Show me the Pyrrha who knocked me on my butt. Gimme my partner back. Her head snapped up with a wary cry, nailing him in the chin. Naruto bit his tongue, grunted in surprise, stumbled back, then wiped a thin line of BLD from his jaw. Pride not in himself sparked to life in his chest, a smile racing hot on its heels. He thumbed the BLD away, turned his head and spat on the mat. That a girl. Now clench your teeth. A lone tear rolled down her left cheek. Sure thing, partner. He darted in, and this time she matched him. They collided in a maelstrom of violence. Fists SWNG, legs pumping. We've got beacon in a year, he roared, catching her fist to smash his forehead against hers. We gotta be ready for anything, Naruto grunted in surprise as a gloved fist crunched into his nose. His teeth clicked together with a harsh crack as his feet left the floor. Stars burst before his vision. Couldn't find unarmed his butt. Pyrrha could punch with the best of them. For a terrible moment he found himself airborne, unable to do anything other than twist his body against the blow he knew was coming. He didn't wait long. Pyrrha whirled and smashed a spinning kick his left side. Aura cracked sullenly. His entire body twisted. The blonde accepted the worthy hit for what it was and fell into a controlled tumble that drove him back against a wall. Anyone else would have been knocked out. He only struck at feet first and stuck there, blatantly defying gravity. Wrapped knuckles punched the wall as he bent his knees, bones bending ominously. Pyrrha's already pale face turned positively pallid. Hey, she cried, no fair, you're using chakra. A side-aiding grin tore across his face. All's fair in love and war. His entire body creaked like a human spring, one that rocketed forward a heartbeat later. Pyrrha got her arms up time and weathered the tackle like a champion, sliding back only a little. Not so the grab that followed. His arms locked around her waist, trying to ignore the wonderful way her body fit against his, and wrenched backward in a powerful slam. Her face crashed into the mat. Long legs scissored up to strike him in the chest, the chin again, forcing him to release her or risk further injury. He fell back to the mat, catching her by the ankle as he went. She joined him on the floor with a gasp. Her by the ankle and flung across the way, Minato whistled. That's my boy. Heat crept up Naruto's neck as he sprang upright. Damn it, Dad, not the time. Pyrrha struck while he was distracted. How dishonorable. He loved it. He swayed out of the way of rabbit punch that followed, took a grazing blow to his ear. His count proved as swift as it was vicious. He rammed a body shot into her ribs. The redhead yelped in genuine pain, doubling over to clutch at her side. Pity nearly stayed Naruto's hand. No. She'd never learn if he went easy on her. Instinct overpowered him, so he struck again. Breath burst from her lungs, leaving her to recoil with a yelp. "Oh, who taught you to fight like that?" "Uncle Obito." Bandaged knuckles came in again, forcing her to fall back as he pressed her with jab after jab. "Dad's a nice guy, just like Uncle Kakashi and Aunt Rin, but sometimes you gotta fight cheap if you want to win. Case in point, smash." She tensed against his shout and tried to protect her weakened ribs. As planned, Naruto changed course at the last, turning a body shot into a rousing roundhouse. Battered knuckles crunched against her face, twisting her head to one side, much as she'd done to him only a few minutes prior. She rocked back on her heels and stumbled away, cradling her face. For the first time, Pyrrha swore. "Sit, that hurt." "Ha," Naruto crowed. "Finally got you to curse." Triumph burned through him like a great flame. "You should do it more often." Her eyes flashed with something akin to triumph, mingling with something else. She caught his fist when he swooped in again. His world upended as flipped him over his shoulder. His arm popped once, causing him to cry out in surprised pain as his back struck the mat. Her knee crashed down on his chest, pinning him where he lay with her body. Okay, he tapped the mat with his free hand. "I give," Pyrrha gasped and let go of him immediately, hands flying to her face. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," a luff laugh tore out of him. "You beat me fair and square. This is your win." He pushed down and forced the joint back in. "Well done. See? Nothing wrong with being a little selfish." Her shoulders stiffened, and for an entirely different reason. Heedless of the landmine he'd just trod upon, Naruto beamed up at her. "I like it when you get greedy," she murmured. "Something selfish? Upper? You okay there?" Pyrrha dove at him. Rather, she saw weakness. And like the trained warrior she was, capitalized on it. She moved her knee and leaned forward atop him, all but straddling him with her hips. Naruto stiffened. Perhaps had he seen her thoughts, he would have realized what he'd just unleashed. The SWCH he'd flipped. He told her to stop worrying what others thought of her. He'd all but beaten it into her skull. At her core, Pyrrha Nikos wasn't a good person. Well, she was, but she wasn't that good. Not as much as others believed her to be. Really, he had no one to blame for this but himself. She bent down, forehead hovering less than an inch from his. Red hair spilled down, tickling his nose. "You're right." When she spoke, her words startled him. Maybe I should be selfish." Green eyes met blue. Naruto's breath hitched in his chest, heart hammering. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. "Hello, Beacon. We're finally here." Naruto fist pumped into the air as they stepped off the airship, punching toward the sunny afternoon with reckless abandon. His smile wasn't at all stifled by the sight of the campus grounds. If anything, it only seemed to enhance his enthusiasm and make him all the more overeager than before. His good cheer was contagious. At least Pyrrha felt it was, if only because she couldn't quite hide her own grin behind a palm. If her partner felt at all anxious, he did little to show it. And good cheer, as they say, is contagious. Everyone had crammed into the airship to see them off, then promptly followed them off it. Literally, they were all here. There was Uncle Obito now, drawing. Naruto aside to rub his nephew's forehead, whilst a rather bemused Kakashi gave him a stern lecture about being safe. A lecture that made all but invalid as Jiraiya passed his grandson a worn orange tome. She had time to glimpse an orange cover before Naruto hit it with a sputter. Odd, hadn't she seen Kakashi reading those? Meh, probably wasn't too important. Remember your training. She caught the tail end of their conversation. You've come far, but your sage mode isn't complete yet? Yeah. Naruto crossed both arms behind his head. I got it, pervy sage. I thought I told you to stop calling me that. You did. I didn't listen. And be sure to tell me all about your adventures. The old sage cackled merrily. I want all the details for my next book hack. His words became a yelp as the boy thumped him upside the head with that very tome. All right, raised hands warded off the book when it came back for a second pass. Such a spoilsport. Guess you really do love Naruto managed to brain him when he wasn't looking. Say that again, and I'll thrash your butt besides. Green eyes narrowed as she espied the cover. Wait, was that book what she thought it was? Here, Be sure to dress warmly. Aunt Rin all but materialized at her side before she could act on her suspicions, blocking her with her body. Let the boys have their fun. I have something for you. Even as she tried to offer a protest, Obito's wife wrapped a loose amber scarf around the pale expanse of her exposed neck. Wouldn't want to catch cold now, would we? I thank you. Pyrrha accepted it with mumbled thanks, momentarily distracted from her anger by this most gracious gift. The fabric was warm and soft in her hands. No, more than that, it almost felt alive. If she focused, she swore she could feel a heartbeat gently moving in time with hers. Preposterous. Fabric wasn't alive, or was it? There you go. That right there? A finger tickled her chin. That's chakra-woven cloth. She blinked when the older woman winked at her unspoken inquiry. Minato's latest invention. It's good for taking a hit or two. Might help in a pinch. Be sure and keep it close, won't you? Firm hands wrapped it just a bit tighter, allowing the fabric to fall over her heart. Don't you look lovely? A small smile tugged at the ex-champion's lips as she admired herself. Surprisingly, the cloth matched her armor well. Thank you, the words sounded hoarse even to her own ears. I'll treasure it. See that you do. The brunette grinned and drew her into a warm embrace. Lips brushed her ear. Look after Naruto, will you? Strong arms drew her just a bit closer. He's the best of Minato, but he's got his mother's temper. Pyrrha's mouth clicked shut. He's never mentioned her. Naruto was full of stories when it came to his family, of father, his aunts, and uncles, and even Jiraiya. But of his mother? Nothing. More than once she'd wondered why, and to have that dangled before her, well, was it so wrong to try and learn a little of her? That's more heartache than anything else. Rin pulled back with a rueful look. Kushina would have adored you. You have her fire. Her ears began to burn anew. Speaking of parents, her adoptive aunt leaned back in with a sly smile. I'm sure Minato would appreciate if you could see your way to giving him some grandchildren in the near future. The world ground to a halt. For a wild moment Pyrrha actually imagined it. Wild red-headed boys with piercing blue eyes, inquisitive green-eyed girls tugging at her skirts. Mine. Her mind took the idea and ran with it, conjuring names out of morning mist. Bella sounded like a fine name for a girl. Or perhaps Cassandra, maybe even Daniela. Oh, but what about the boys? She'd need names for them, too. Leon sounded nice. Maybe. Pyrrha, dear? Rin tugged at her sleeve, snapping her back to reality. You're drooling. And no, she wasn't. She tossed her head from side to side frantically. Quite all right. Rin grinned and touched a hand to her own stomach. I've been daydreaming about children myself these days. Pyrrha's eyes got really big. When all her fears and worries were forgotten in an instant. How do you even know? She tilted her head, regarding the woman's still flat stomach. No, not quite flat. But surely it was too early to tell. Rin would have said something earlier. For all her mysterious ways. Naruto's aunt was horrid when it came to keeping secrets. A mother always knows. The brunette preened. I'm only a few weeks along, barely even a month. Does, Pyrrha swallowed once. Does Uncle Obito know? He will. Brown eyes twinkled in quiet merriment. I want it to be a surprise. He'll make a wonderful father, don't you think? What's this about a surprise, now? Pyrrha jerked back with a sputter and wiped at her chin as the boys came back. And still no sign of Minato among them. Is he still not here? Jiraiya offered a helpless shrug. That's my pupil for you. I don't mind. Naruto seemed oddly cheery about that. Dad went on ahead. It's what he does. Oh, don't worry about him. Obito slung an arm around her shoulder. He's probably finalizing some paperwork with the headmaster or something. Nothing you need worry about. He can take care of himself. Uncle Kakashi rolled his good eye and looked away. Maybe they should. I still don't trust that man. You worry too much, Sir Grumpapants. And you don't worry enough. Now, boys. Rin bowled her way between them. Let's not fight in front of the kids. Both men subsided instantly. Pyrrha felt the ghost of a smile pluck at the corner of her mouth. What did Yan call this? Oh, right. Whipped. These two were absolutely whipped. Naruto shrugged and Pyrrha exchanged a rueful look with him. Truly was a wonderful thing to have such a large family. Some might call it strange to have so many people fussing over her like this. All told, she rather liked it. Beacon's bell rang ahead, calling them to their destiny. Hot on its heels, a woman's voice called out across the courtyard. Will all aspirants report to the auditorium? I repeat, all aspirants to the auditorium. Well, Pyrrha swallowed, surprised to find her throat dry. It would seem this is... Fate awaits. Naruto wavered beside her. Be seeing you guys. Be safe. Rin wasn't having any of it. Naruto was still speaking when she dared in and drew the two of them into one last hug. Obito saw his chance and pounced, dragging Kakashi with him. It wasn't long before Jiraiya joined them, thought not with a bemused roll of the eyes that had Naruto clicking his tongue. Pyrrha felt tears sting her eyes. This wasn't the end, she told herself. Only the beginning. Naruto slung an arm over her shoulders. Pyrrha leaned into it. Soon all her worries were swept away, like cinders in the wind. Think they'll be okay? Yup. Rin watched them with a fond smile. They've got this. Now, then, Obito pivoted on one heel. Let's deal with the little rat that's been following us. Behind them, a hooded figure detached itself from the airship. It didn't get far before they gave chase. Nope. Not far at all. Beacon really was incredible. Pyrrha had heard no end of tall tales about it, but to see it firsthand, well, it was an experience. Seeing was believing and all that. Tall arched spires and grand architecture aside, it was very much as she'd thought it would be, a place of light and peace, of hope. And the future. They would be spending the next 4 years here, her and Naruto both. It helped that they were very much the stragglers here. While they bonded with family and friends, everyone had gone ahead of the alone. They had ample time to admire everything as they made their way towards the auditorium. She was glad for that. Perhaps that W so? Naruto nudged her with an elbow as they walked. What do you think of team names? Pyrrha's neck craned toward him, somewhat startled. Isn't it a little early to be worrying about something like that? Nah. His grin outshone all her fears. Forewarned is forearmed after all. I want to be on a team with you, of course. But if you don't... No, no, no. She lunged forward and clasped his hands with hers. I want to be with you, too. Their faces flamed as the enormity of her words caught up to them a moment later. Pyrrha's mind rebooted. Her eyes blinked. Once, twice, thrice. Oh, dear. Was it hot out here? Naruto's face was a startling shade of red, and she was sure that had she a mirror, her own pale visage would have matched her hair. Rin whistled from the landing zone. That's my girl. Not like that. She jerked back with a yelp. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but my heart isn't ready for once again. Naruto's laughter spelled all her fears away. Yeah, I get what you mean. Don't worry. His shoulder brushed his. This'll be grand. She took a moment to contemplate matters. Further, as they walked side by side, she felt his shoulder brush hers and leaned into him a little. Too shy to hold his hand in public, she nevertheless reveled in the quiet comfort of his proximity as her hip nudged against his. What team did she want? In an ideal world, she would prefer a group that would be a threat to her, mentally as well as physically. Just a band of friends or even perfect strangers if she was lucky. No Yong or Ruby or Malachites to drive her up the wall and into the ceiling. John might be nice. He was a good friend. Really, anyone but those three would do. But as Pyrrha well knew, the world was not ideal. Sometimes you got what you bargained for, and sometimes the world threw you a wicked little curve when you least expected it. Still, no matter what came, she swore she would be ready for it. She would not falter. She would not fail here. She was a Nikos, after all. So, Naruto grinned. How does Team Pineapple sound? Pyrrha couldn't help but giggle at him. That sounds absolutely horrid. All right, but hear me out. How about weapon or napalm? They've got a nice ring to M. A wretched explosion shook Beacon's cliffs. Fire flashed across broken earth, baking it to clay and flinging a cloaked form to the ground. Obito sauntered out of the smoke, whistling softly. Burning Sharingan eyes regarded the twitching form at his feet. So you're Salem's latest pawn. He gave their trembling form a kick for good measure. That's what, the second one this year. Rin butchered the last one of you. When they didn't rise, he dropped down to his haunches to regard them further. Your MSTR really doesn't train you lot all that? Well, does she? He shook his head. Really, it's sad. You'll never achieve peace like this. Don't weep for the stupid deer. Rin walked over their broken body to perch at his side. You'll be crying all day." The hooded figure groaned unintelligibly. Obito seeked his head like a bemused squirrel. "I'm sorry, what was that?" Their victim stumbled upright, swaying violently. "I said I'll never talk. Everything I do for the sake of my goddessack." A burning blade of chakra slammed through their back and burst out their chest. "About that," Kakashi hummed in their ear, "your compliance really isn't a factor here." In a single seamless movement he stepped away and ripped his blade from their back, spattering the earth red. In their dying moments, the assassin actually wept, and went into a frenzy. Flailing like a madman, they their cloak free with a shriek and slammed a hooked tail up into Obito's face. It was a sound strategy. Attack the one member of the group with their guard down in a fit of petty spite. Really, it should have worked. A single blow, a single kill, until their weapon passed right through him. Literally, it phased through his flesh, leaving him utterly unharmed. Bad choice. Obito shook his head, swayed forward, and kicked him in the teeth. "Congrats. Now I have to kill you. Nothing personal. Can't have you messing about with our little nephew." He reached down. Sharingan eyes flashed. "So tell me everything before you die, would you kindly?" Tyrian Kalos blinked up at them with blank eyes. "Yes, of course, Mr. Night came with all due swiftness. In truth, Naruto hadn't paid the headmaster's speech much mind. Not when his mind was focused on other matters. Really, between Pyrrha being antsy and everyone shooting him sidelong glances, he was well and truly ready for initiation to be over and done with. Maybe then they'd have some semblance of normalcy. Ack. Bad joke. Yang was rubbing off on him. "Are you sure this is allowed?" He flicked Pyrrha a lazy glance as he finished setting out their gear. "Don't see why not. It'll be fine." He'd set his sleeping bag off to one side in a corner behind some audio equipment, the better to have some manner of privacy while he slept. Naturally, Pyrrha had claimed the spot beside him. That suited him just fine. They were partners after all. If not yet in name, then in spirit. It didn't help the glances. No one seemed keen to save them on that front. Carden had started a pillow fight with some ginger-haired girl, and John had been dragged into it on her side. Really, they were trading blows like champions. Good on him. He really needed a friend after that whole vomit boy incident back on the airship. Not far from them, and toward the center of the room, he spied Ruby and Yang engaged in a rather heated argument with a spirited, white-haired girl. Was that a Schnee? She looked like a Schnee. Whoever she was, she seemed to be ranting about something. Dust and craters. He didn't much get it. Another with dark hair sat only feet away, knees tucked into her chest, golden eyes fixed firmly upon a novel. Poor thing tried to ignore the lot of them to no avail. She sensed his gaze and looked up. Naruto saw the plight there and shrugged helplessly. "Nope, not getting involved in that. Sorry." He mouthed across the way, hoping she could read his lips. "Just ignore him." The girl favored him with a tiny smile and blew out her candle, plunging her side of the room into darkness. It only made Ruby and Yang squawk all the louder, which in turn riled up their companion. Good lord, the Schnee had a pair of lungs. With a shake of his head, he finished his task and reached for his lamp. "Guess we should turn in ourselves. Well, if it isn't tall, blonde, and handsome." Naruto's BLD ran ice cold. Fate wasn't very kind tonight, it seemed. Pyrrha smacked her head against the wall in a rare moment of anger. She seemed to share his sentiment. No, not now, not them, anyone but them. Naruto knew who had called to them even before he pivoted and saw them. As ever, one wore white to bed, while the other favored red. If their garb didn't give them away, their faces did. They were twins after all. "Hey, Melanie." He stifled a yawn with the back of his pal and raised a hand in greeting. "Milsha, you're here, too? Didn't see you during the speech." Then again, he hadn't looked very strong. "Of course we're here." The taller of the two scoffed. "Did you think we'd let you just up and leave?" Naruto forebore the urge to roll his eyes. In many respects, the Malachite twins were worse than Yang. At least Xiaolong only made the occasional bad joke. These two, well, they weren't mean or rude. They were simply direct. Frightfully direct. They'd come to the Leaf Gym weaker than most, but by the end, they'd stood in the top 5. Perhaps they'd taken to Dad's methods a little too well. What they lacked in strength, they more than made up for in teamwork and tenacity. He didn't mind them, make no mistake, they were good friends, but this was plain bad timing. So, lover boy. Milsha plonked down beside him. This spot taken, Pyrrha plastered a false smile to her face and didn't move from his other side. It very much is. Not sorry. Melanie grinned. Oh, a little fight in you. I like that. Always knew you were thirsty. Didn't realize you'd gotten grabby when we weren't looking. Naruto coughed. Hey, come on now. Come on, Blondie, there's more than enough to go around. She winked up at him. Sure you don't mind if I take a bite? I very much mind. A familiar Redan bronze blur interposed itself between the two of them. Oh boy, knowing what was coming, Naruto winced anew. Somebody just flipped Pyrrha's SWCH. Do you see this? His girlfriend waved her no-clenched knuckles before Melanie's face. This is my fist. You'll be eating this if you touch him without my permission. If she expected the twins to finally get the message, she would be sorely disappointed. Melanie leaned back and smoothed her hands across her pajamas. Her grin was firmly of the sight-eating variety. Indeed, she looked like the cat that caught the canary and slaughtered it. Melita's was positively predatory by comparison. So we just need your permission. Then, she sauntered forward to tap a hand against Pyrrha's cheek. All right. Milsha mirrored her sister's smile. Good to know. Pyrrha blinked. What? So we just have to stuck you to get to him. Melanie continued on unabated. Always like to challenge. Should be fun helping you lighten up a little. Naruto's hand struck his forehead as Pyrrha began to sputter. No, I never said that. I never meant too late. The damage had been done. Bye, we'll see you tomorrow. They sashayed away, hips swinging gressist. Naruto's gaze snapped to the ceiling before Pyrrha could round on him. When she finally did, she found him admiring the skylight. Nothing else, you didn't look? Nope, you did, though. Her pale face turned a lovely shade of red. I did not. Hey, least I know how to stuck you now. He winked. Just gotta put some swing in my hips. SNRK. Pyrrha uttered a very unladylike snort and hastily muffled it with her fist. Still, she couldn't quite keep the smile from her face. You're trying to cheer me up. That depends. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers. Is it working? Maybe. She looked up at him through her lashes. You really didn't look? Swear on the gods. Swear on my ramen stash. He smacked his lips with an audible pop. Who do you take me for? I'm not about to jump the first pair of legs I see. Come on, let's go to bed. All right. She took his hand with a sigh. Naruto knew she was sulking on the inside. He could only pray that she wouldn't start plotting. Pyrrha could be surprisingly sneaky when she wanted to be. She nudged his side gently. Are you awake? Blue eyes drifted open in the dark, staring at the auditorium ceiling. Even in the dim lighting they were sharp and keen. Yeah, he answered after a moment's pause. Can't sleep. He didn't protest when she crawled into his sleeping bag, if anything. He gladly made room for her. It was just large enough for both of them, yet so snug as to keep them pressed close all the same. An arm coiled loosely around her waist, nothing more. Her BLD boiled in her veins, singing a soft of fire and longing. Her very soul was afire. She wriggled closer. Naruto quirked a brow. What are you doing? Her head came up under his chin as her hand sought his face. Being selfish. I swear, that's your new favorite phrasmuth. Pyrrha didn't give him a chance to finish. She leaned in and captured his lips with hers. He stirred against her. Gentle hands ghosted across the swell of her breasts, bringing with it a feverish well of delight. Her hips rocked against his. The friction felt even through the thick fabric of their pajamas, and she felt him stiffen against her, causing her heart to beat in her chest like a wild colt. Naruto tried to pull away, tried to warn her. We're gonna get caught. I don't care. She embraced him again and her pulse quickened that much more. What did she care if they were caught now? If someone tried to make a meal of this, they'd get a knuckle sandwich and a thrashing besides. It wasn't their place to intrude. She wanted this. She needed this, if only to remind herself to remind him of what he meant to her. Not enough. More. Her mouth melded with his softly, sweetly, tongue lick at the edge of his lips, questing for entry. She wasn't that same shy, polite girl anymore. He'd told her to be selfish, and so selfish she would be. Just a bit, just a little, just when it mattered most. When did you get this bold? He laughed despite her fears, and she pushed him down again, fingers playing with the hem of his shirt. You did this to me, she gasped out. Take responsibility. It was a fierce embrace, all things considered, wild and intent, reckless with little abandon. She didn't care who saw. Close enough to matter, to mean something. She wouldn't let anyone else be with her this way, touch her this way, whisper such sweet nothing to her. She didn't want him to look at anyone else the way he looked at her. She wanted to be first. None heard them that night. Thankfully, sleep came soon thereafter. They woke the next morning and made ready with all due haste. What else was there to do but prepare? Neither spoke so much as a word as they ate breakfast, then fetched their lockers to don their armor and weapons. Theirs was a silence not born from discomfort or any such anxiety, but rather trust. The quiet was a soft and gentle one, comfortable, even, everything that needed to be said had already been said the night before. Each trusted that the other would know what to do, and did as such. Help me with this, will you? Pyrrha held up her hair for him, offering the pale expanse of her neck unto his eyes. Naruto felt his throat go dry. His body betrayed him, and he moved. His lips ghosted just under her left ear, and she shivered a little. That's not fair. I need to focus. He laughed against her neck. Oh, I'm very focused right now. She batted at his hand, and Naruto withdrew with a low laugh of his own. Remember. She reached around, touched a hand to her shoulder. Together. His turned out and clasped her arm with a radiant smile so much like his namesake. Together. It was all a blur. Pyrrha held her tongue and listened as Ozpin prattled on atop the cliffs, espousing the importance of their test. She tried to listen. She really did. But the stress wouldn't let her. Somehow she managed to recall enough of the important bits. At least, she hoped they were important. She didn't have the patience to memorize every tenets of the test. Eye contact once you landed got you a partner. Get a relic, match with another, bring it back to the cliffs. Do all this before the time limit expired, and you made in. Fail, and she didn't want to fail. The thought threatened to paralyze her. Her feet shifted restlessly on the launch pad. Naruto winked, showing her his right arm. He launched just before her, and she tracked him with her eyes. 1 second passed. 2, 3, 4, 5. In a fit of pique, she flared her semblance and triggered her pad ahead of the others. Almost immediately, her world turned on its head. Wind whipped at her face and snapped at her eyes, drawing angry, stinging tears from the ex-champion. She squinted against them, struggling to find a patch of sunny blonde hair there. Ahead of her, Naruto flung his arms out with a whoop, long sleeves snapping against his sides. She glimpsed something shiny on his left wrist, the one not sheathed in a gauntlet. A glimmer of metal. He was wearing metal, when he never, ever did. She realized why when he snapped that hand into the air. Now, Pyrrha, his voice rose above the wild winds. What are you waiting for? Tears stung at her eyes again for a different reason altogether. He'd known. He'd always known. She really did love him. Her hand flew forward and stretched out with her semblance. Her will wrapped around the thin bracelet. A quick tug was all it took to alter his trajectory. She heard an awful pop as his arm protested against the sudden movement, but he didn't cry out, nor did he deviate his path from hers. Too late, she glimpsed the wild grin tearing across his whiskered visage. Only then did she realize what he intended. Look out below. They collided, and together they crashed down into the canopy. Branches tore at their aura, but it held firm, and they fell gracelessly to the forest floor. In hindsight, Pyrrha wasn't sure how long it took, only that it did. A wild tumble that sent them both sprawling. She landed atop him, driving the breath from his lungs. See? He grinned up at her as she pulled away. You knew what I was thinking. Didn't even have to tell ya. We're one hell of a team, aren't we? A tan hand reached up to pat her cheek, and she nuzzled against it. Told ya I'd never leave you alone. A lone tear ran down her cheek. You never go back on your word, do you? Behind them, the brush parted. I'm sorry, a new voice called. Am I interrupting? Naruto's jaw clicked open. Well, didn't see that coming. Pyrrha buried her head in Naruto's chest. It was just too funny. She couldn't help herself. She began to laugh unabated. Fate had a sense of humor, it seemed. Hey, the newcomer huffed and stomped a foot. Stop laughing, bright eyes flashed in indignation. This isn't funny, they only laughed all the louder. Cease, Weiss considered herself a good person. She was prim and proper above all else, ever conscious of her reputation, of right and wrong. All her life, she'd been careful to cultivate a good image of herself. It was expected of her. Demanded. She was a Schnee, after all. Father would tolerate nothing less. Whatever you wanted in this world, you had to take it. Time and time again. There were no miracles in this world. Everything you wanted must be grasped with your own two hands. Nothing less would too. Father had beaten that lesson into her. Weiss still heard his voice, sometimes. You want to be my heir, child? Then show me your mettle. Prove that you're better than your runaway sister, that you have the right to lead this company. Beacon, you say. Fight for it. Defeat this enemy. What's that? A scar? What of it? A Schnee does not cry. Surely you can at least do this much. You're such a disappointment to me, Weiss. Weiss? Weiss! A hand waved before her face, snapping her back toward reality. Remnant to Weiss, reality snapped back with an awful crack, leaving ice-blue eyes blinking rapidly. I'm sorry, she blinked once and dabbed a bit of sweat from her brow. Did you say something, Pyrrha? Don't be. Striking green eyes met hers. You had us worried for a moment there. I'm fine, I assure you. If you say so. Naruto shrugged beside their resident redhead. Better pay attention. They'll be calling our names any minute now. Weiss tossed her head and lifted her chin. I'm quite prepared, good sir. Naruto blinked. Sir. Her new partner chose that moment to chime in. This from the girl who was muttering to herself a minute ago? Young Xiaolong, she rounded on the culprit in question with a scowl. You're my partner, you're meant to be on my side. Yeah, no, I'm very much on their side. The blonde brawler crossed both arms behind her head with a catty grin. Whiskers over there could fold me in half if I PSS him off. Her smile took on a more lascivious look. Pyrrha already did. Weiss found herself shrinking back a bit. Truly? One time. Pyrrha looked away with a sigh. And she never lets me forget it. Nope, Naruto pinched the brow of his nose. Young, don't poke Pyrrha, or I'll be the one doing the bending. Her eyes absolutely flashed. Don't make promises you can't keep, lover-boy. He swatted at her, only to miss as she ducked. Always with the jokes. Pyrrha pushed her way between them. Young, no. Bad Young, Weiss blinked slowly. This was the woman who had all of Mistral quaking in fear of her name. Pyrrha Nikos was something of a fascination to Weiss. Not an idol, but rather an example. Something she'd studied her career extensively, almost obsessively. A former tournament, once. Known throughout Mistral as the Invincible Girl before her ignoble defeat. Since then she had thrown off the yoke placed on her by her own father. Someone who forged her own path in defiance of tradition and custom. She was not the Invincible Girl anymore. She had thrown that title away, and the prestige with it. She lived with full control of her life, her destiny, everything she could ever want. Weiss wanted that. So what if she'd stumbled upon her having a moment with someone back in the Emerald Forest? Weiss wasn't a prude, no matter what anyone might say. It was only natural that a young man and woman who trust one another would eventually entertain such activities. They hadn't expected her to bumble her way into their clearing, that was all. It did not bother Weiss. Nay, it didn't bother her. Not a bit. Nope. Alright? It bothered her a lot. Naturally, when she'd seen her from afar, she tried to partner up with her. Technically, she'd gotten what she wanted. Pyrrha Nikos may not be her teammate, blast that blonde of hers, but they were going to be on the same team, she just knew it. With a bit of luck, she would yet be named leader of it. This was fate. This was destiny. It was meant to be. That said, initiation had proven to be rather tame, all things considered. Almost suspiciously. There were no giant grim attacks, no chaos, hardly any grim at all, really. Little more than a race to collect the relics and make it to the cliffs in time. Her current partner left much to be desired, but at least she knew enough to handle herself. Better her than that, she thought to herself. Her teammates certainly knew how to fight. She'd scarcely had a chance to display her skills. Yang aside, Naruto and Pyrrha had cut through the grim like a storm. Try as she might, she couldn't help but wonder where she stood compared to them. Those three were just so physical. They clearly knew one another long before initiation, almost intimately so. So did that leave her? Will, Weiss Schnee, Pyrrha Nikos, Yang Xiaolong and Naruto Uzumaki please make their way to the stage? The implacable voice of Headmaster Ozpin cut through her maudlin thoughts once more. I repeat, please make your way to the stage. Weiss did so, keenly aware of everyone's eyes upon her. This was her moment. Do or die. Her partner elbowed her with a wink as they walked. Showtime, princess. Yang was going to rue this day. She swore it. You retrieved the black knight pieces. Ozpin's gaze swept over each of them in turn. Henceforth, you will be known as Team Weapon, otherwise known as Team Weapon. Weapon? Her mind initially balked at the given title. How droll. The name was a bit galling, but they would make it theirs. In a sense they were each of them a weapon, against the grim, against injustice, against all the evils of the world. Such were the ideals embodied by a huntsman. Yes, when she thought of it like that, she rather liked it. Weapons could be many colors. Led by Weiss Schnee, ha! Her heart gave a little thrill of pride as the headmaster spoke her name for a second time. She stole a subtle glance at her new teammates and was immediately embarrassed for it. Naruto and Pyrrha returned her startled smile with warm words and encouragement sure enough, but it was their arms that truly drew her attention. Holding hands in public, how shameless. Come on, Yang elbowed her again. Don't be a prude. Xiaolong, I will harm you. They were SCRT off stage and left to watch with the others. Another set of names were called. Next we have Ruby Rose, Nora Valkyrie, Lai Ren, and Blake Belladonna. Just as before, Ozpin waited courteously until the aforementioned students assembled before him. You collected the white bishop pieces. Yet again that intense gaze swept over them, searching for any sign of weakness. Only when he found none did he continue. Henceforth you will be known as Team RVRB or Reverb, for short. Understandable, Weiss allowed. Scraping the bottom of the barrel, but understandable. Led by Ruby Rose. That child? Yang's fist slammed into the air. Way to go, sis. Well, it wasn't as if she was on their team. Perhaps she had acquitted herself well in initiation. Who could say? Weiss listened only a little as they came and went, followed soon thereafter by another. A third team, CRDL, that is to say Cardinal, was christened, and she paid them little mind. Wonder where John is, Naruto whispered. Pyrrha offered a small shrug. I'm sure he made it. She was with him after all. Sure enough, a fourth list of names were called, much to the immediate chagrin of Weiss. John Ark, Melanie Malachite, Milsha Malachite and... Ozpin paused, squinted at his scroll and frowned. I do hope I'm reading this last one correctly. Neapolitan, is that right? A girl with flowing hair of strawberry pink and chocolate brown skipped onto their stage well ahead of the others. Oh, right. Yang hummed in quiet appreciation. Almost forgot about her. Figures she made it. In. Weiss considered the stranger anew. Gods above, she was a tiny little thing. Even Ruby was taller than this one, and that was saying something. Still, Weiss couldn't help but frown at the sight of her. What was the saying father often used? Dangerous things came in small packages. She couldn't help but feel the same about this one. There was an air about her, as if she found this all terribly amusing. A grand joke, with each and every one of them as the punchline. When their eyes met across the way, the strange girl seeked her head in silent curiosity. Then she smiled at Weiss. It was not a pleasant thing, that smile. Those mismatching eyes were narrow and sharp, her grin that of a predator considering its prey. And beneath it, Weiss felt like the latter. All her pride and courage meant nothing in the face of that half-lidded gaze. The little hellion saw her, knew her. Neo's lips parted, moving soundlessly. I see you, little Schnee. Weiss jolted and reached for Meidernaster, only to remember it wasn't there. This was no mere student. Neo, wait up. With one last lingering look at her, the petite predator turned and preened as her teammates climbed up onto the stage. A blond young man Weiss dimly recognized stepped up to her. Neo immediately pressed herself into his side and clung to his arm. The girl's grin told a story all its own as they looked fondly upon one another. Before her eyes she stood on the very tips of her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek. The blonde sputtered at the sudden display of affection, but didn't draw away. Ozpin saw it too and regarded them with a fond smile. Henceforth you will be known as Team Jasmine, or Jasmine. Pyrrha winced. Oh dear, the twins won't be happy with that name. Led by John Ark, Naruto whistled. That a boy, John! Pyrrha and Yang shouted encouragement of their own. And yet, Despite all that, Weiss couldn't forget what she'd just seen. That creature was more than she appeared. She would do well to stay far, far away from her. This wasn't all that bad, really. Naruto found he rather liked his new teammates, if only because he knew them so well already. Well, it went without saying for Pyrrha, but really, that had been something of luck, blundering into Weiss, because she'd brought Yang with her. He remembered her well enough from all their time in the gym, though Pyrrha still seemed strangely cross about that, and while Weiss was a bit of a mystery, Naruto felt he could get along with her well enough once he got the measure of her. Their dorm was not small, but he couldn't call it roomy either. A bit of redecorating might be in order once they finished their first meeting. Ought to make things interesting. Put up a few posters, some decorations, perhaps a bunk bed or two. The thought tore a grin from him. Bunk beds sounded nice, for reasons he wasn't about to say. So, he offered the proverbial olive branch as he sprawled on his cot. We're settled in. Is this part where we start spilling our hopes and dreams to each other? Pyrrha rolled her eyes and settled in beside him. Not much point in that. You already know mine. Same. Yang uttered a jaw-popping yawn as she stretched upon her own bed. Weiss blinked, momentarily taken aback. I beg your pardon. Well, he elaborated, not at all liking the mulish look in her eye. When you think about it, we don't know all that much about each other, you and Pyrrha do. Leave it to Yang to be the devil's advocate. She wiggled her brows at him, and Naruto felt an insidious heat creep up the back of his neck. You're thick as thieves. Pyrrha didn't deny it, of course. She was stubborn like that. Point taken. He coughed into his fist to hide it. So, what about you, Weiss? What's your story? The Schnee preened a little, and he suspected he had the measure of her. Not one of those posh, arrogant types after all. Not quite. Well, if you must know. All too easy. Pride cometh before the fall, little Schnee. Her story was much as he suspected it would be. Not a fall from grace, but a tale of a young girl seeing her way in the world. She'd come to Vale of her own accord, but the tacit tones of her voice told another story. It wasn't strong to make a conjecture here or there with the hints she laid. A bad home life was one thing and a bad mother, but for a father to be that controlling of their daughter, it struck up ugly parallels with Pyrrha's old man. He said as much once she finished. Someone needs to smack your old man in the mouth. Yang nearly fell off her bunk, blunt as ever. I see. Careful, Weiss. He'll have you eaten out of the palm of his hand. I do not disagree with that statement. The fencer allowed. But his legacy is not your legacy. Naruto finished. I know. You do? Yup, he smacked his lips. The sins of the parent can't be the sins of the daughter. Just ask Pyrrha. Her dad's a DCK, but she's sweet as sugar. Her face turned red as her hair. An elbow found his ribs, creating a dull ache. He ignored it. Yang's mom ran out on her because, according to our favorite Bond brawler, she's a cowardly beach. Guilty as charged. His fellow blonde raised a hand. Doesn't bother me. I've got a better mother now. Summer makes some mean cookies. And I don't judge them for that. He continued. Life is what you make of it, not your parents, you know. When he looked back, a bit of life had come back to Weiss' gaze. Behind him, Pyrrha sighed softly. Not another one. Another what? What the hell was she on about? In hindsight, he had no way of knowing just how much he'd impressed Weiss. Why would he? The female mind was a strange thing. Many are its mysteries. He didn't see Yang CCK her head, nor the sudden way in which Pyrrha was regarding the Schnee, treating her as some poisonous snake. Thus, it came as something of a surprise when Weiss' icy demeanor actually thawed a bit. It seems I may have misjudged you. She frowned, though the words lacked their usual bite. Perhaps you're not such a brute after all. Great, that was good. Right? Naruto grinned. Sue, can we be friends? I said may. A pale finger jabbed his nose. Don't let it go to your head. Gods know your ego's thick as a brick. I still don't think much of you. Awa, I love you too. Ugh, Yang laughed. Wow, total tsundere, am I right? Weiss arched a pale brow. You do realize I am armed? Yeah, she smacked her fists together. Funny thing, that. So am I. You want a goke? Weiss raised the other brow and Yang's diatribe trailed off into an undignified squeak as a glyph hummed into existence beneath her feet. Gravity reversed, and she slammed her into the ceiling. Pyrrha applauded a little at the display. Hey, no fair, Yang flailed, to no avail. Let me go, poor choice of words. As you wish. Gravity reversed and Xiaolong crashed into the ground. A muffled groan rose from the carpet. Naruto leaned back with a rueful smile. Pyrrha laid her head against his chest and threaded her hand with his. Good. Their schnee was already beginning to cut loose. Someday, the four of them really would make one hell of a team. But he couldn't be silent forever. All right? He cleared his throat. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, what do you say we do a little team-building exercise? Pyrrha perked up. I'm game. Same here. Yang leaned forward on her elbows, anger momentarily forgotten. We hardly had a chance to fight anything back in the Emerald Forest. Yes, and he'd noticed that. Everyone said the forests around Beacon were teeming with the creatures, yet they'd barely seen any. Had the teachers called them beforehand? Or was there something else at work here? He could have sworn he was missing something, but for the life of him, he couldn't see what. Something to ponder later. What did you have in mind? Pyrrha tugged at his hand, pulling him back to reality. Well, his brow furrowed, I was thinking maybe a bit of a spar or something. We didn't really get to see each other fight all that much back in initiation. Yang huffed. Tell me about it. True, his partner agreed. It was rather tame. Ahem, Weiss cleared her throat. As team leader, I believe the final say should rest with me. Pyrrha stiffened. Really, Weiss? Yes, really, you're all ignoring me. That's rude. Yang flopped back onto her bed with a put-upon sigh. Here we go. Anyone else would have been irritated by what seemed a blatant power play. Naruto wasn't. If only because he saw the truth of the matter. Weiss wasn't trying to throw her weight around non-existent, though it was. But neither did she wish to be ignored, either. He'd always been able to read people, and he could see that she felt left out, clear as day. Sorry, he flashed her his most disarming grin. Didn't mean to step on your toes. There. Got any ideas? WL, her pale face turned a pretty shade of pink, and she looked away thrice as quickly. I'm open to suggestions. She didn't have any ideas after all, then. She just wanted to be heard. Like a little sister. Cute. All right. He sat up a little bit, pulling Pyrrha with him. Pyrrha and I already know how to fight one another, and I've seen Yang style a time or two. How about a doubles match? He was still speaking when he felt Pyrrha latch onto his arm. Dibs. Guileless green eyes met his. DMN, she's thirsty. Yang swore. Guess that leaves you and me. Why scream? Again with the nicknames, she hissed. Do you have a death wish? Nah, it's just fun to ruffle your feathers. So it's decided. Then a harsh knock on the wall just above his head cut him short. Hey, an equally familiar voice chimed through the thin plaster. You setting up a brawl over there? That was Melanie if he'd ever heard her. Ooh, Ruby's gleeful cry came through the opposite side. Can we join, too? We're bored. Well, all right then, he cracked his knuckles, feeling just a little vindictive. Change of plans. Let's show these rookies how professionals fight. Yeah, Yang slammed her fists together. It'll be just like old times. Let's kick some butt, Pyrrha rolled up a sleeve. It does sound like an entertaining little diversion. Weiss slapped a hand to her forehead. Children, the lot of you. They were already halfway out the door when she looked up. Oi, Weiss, you coming or what? She bolted to her feet. Wait for me. What a lovely day. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. There was a three-way brawl down there in the courtyard. Wait, what? Ozpin took a long, measured sip of his coffee as he noticed the chaos raging below. From his tower window, he had an unparalleled view of it all. The headmaster blinked, then he frowned. Taking a step back, he cleaned his spectacles once for good measure, adjusted them, then donned them again. No, that was most certainly a melee down there. Not a bloody one by any means, but still impossible to miss. If the sounds of steel striking steel weren't obvious enough. Then he sighed softly as the brawl below descended into utter chaos. Really, it was a mass ace. Team Whippin had been called such for a reason. Friendships were far less violent in my day. He settled into watch with a small smile. Pyrrha gloried in mindless melee. There was just something so freeing about it. No thoughts, no worries. Just simple chaos in the courtyard. She didn't fight. She danced, and worked. A whirl in her hands, whirling, cutting, parrying and blocking as she raged back and forth, trusting her back to her teammates as she forged a path into madness. DMN, but it felt good to have a team. Perhaps that was a bit of an understatement on Pyrrha's part. She'd long had a partner in Naruto long before she came to Beacon, but she felt it worth saying regardless. Friends were one thing, but teammates were another. Naruto she could trust to watch her flank, and to a lesser extent Yang, no matter their rivalry, so she needn't fear much on that front. Weiss was something of an anomaly. Technically their team leader, she slotted in rather well in this morning madness, in that she'd promptly claimed the high ground for herself and made devastating use of it via her glyphs. At least she knew better to shout commands that would be summarily ignored. Pyrrha, on your left. That warning did not go unheeded. Ruby's scythe swept at Pyrrha's head from the side and was caught it with a lazy swipe of her shield, the backswing of which sent the small girl twirling end over end before crashing into a fountain face first. Oh, dear. In all fairness, she really hadn't meant to hit her that strong. She winced as little bubbles welled up from the water. Ruby was tough, right? Surely she'd be all right. I'm sorry. Vengeance for Ruby, some madwoman with a hammer rushed her. Naruto fell upon them like a falling star, all but smashing them into the ground. Sorry. He patted her stunned forehead. Power of friendship really ain't a thing here? Nora groaned. Ooh, pretty stars. A shadow fell over them. Pyrrha whirled and flung like a discus, only for her shield to pass through empty air. No, not air. It crashed through something, but it wasn't a person. Impossible. She'd glimpsed a girl with dark hair and golden eyes. So where had she? She had half an instant to realize her peril before someone slammed a knee into her back. She never remembered who in the madness and sent her stumbling away. Yang's gauntlet barked and her would-be attacker went flying. She caught a flash of startled pink eyes and green clothes as they sprawled at her feet. There, she pivoted for a knockout blow, only to find another of them caught and bound by a pair of glyphs, courtesy of Weiss. Oh, a stranger. Good. Easy pickings. A vicious kick sent her victim to her knees. From there her hand snapped up, her semblance flared and the weapon of her would-be attacker shot into the air, dragging its owner with it. Foolish. Really, sometimes one had to know when to drop their weapon and fight on. Hey, Nikos, she turned and planted a fist against her hip, mildly nonplussed to find a familiar face awaiting her. Not going to sneak up on me, pardon? Nah. Her next opponent brandished his heavy mace with a lazy grin. No fun that way. Sides, he looked past her, wincing a little as Naruto blasted Melanie and Milsha into the air. I'd get my butt kicked for it. True. So you'd rather take your lumps the strong way? He ducked a flailing body and stormed forward. Something like that. She settled into a loose stance and moved to meet him, shield raised before her face. Cardin Winchester wasn't the same bully he'd been before the Leaf Gym. He'd had that mean streak beaten out of him and come out the better for it. Minato would allow nothing less. Under his tutelage, you became your best self or… No, wait, he really didn't let anyone quit these days, so she supposed the point was moot. But even he had his pride. I'll get you this time, he swore. Green eyes flashed as she dove in. We'll see. Sparks flew as her spear skittered off the jagged face of his mace. Cardin fought well, honorably, even. No flourishes or stupid showmanship here. He gave ground slowly, but reliably, retreating toward higher ground as she pressed him. Points for that. He knew he couldn't hope to match her in sheer speed, but then, again, he didn't have to. A single swipe of that mace could shatter aura in an instant, even break bones if one wasn't careful. Unfortunately, his weapon was every bit a one-trick pony. For all of his strength, it really didn't matter so long as he didn't hit you. Their weapons clashed. Pyrrha moved to sweep his legs, and paused when she saw his smile. A hand reached around, ignoring the blade grating against his skin to grab her wrist. She hacked into it, a snarl, but his grin only grew. With neither word nor warning, that massive mace lost the wide flanges at the edges as its bulk folded inward, gears clicking and whirling as gave BRTH to an entirely new weapon. Too late, she realized her mistake as she found herself staring down the barrel of a cannon. Rule number 1 of the Leaf Gym. Adapt, adapt, adapt. Cardin had adapted. Gotcha. Her body moved of its own accord. Her heel soared upward and nailed him in the groin. Carden folded like a wet paper bag. Pyrrha, what the hell? I'm sorry, her face colored. It was instinct. Pyrrha stepped over his crumpled form of her defeated adversary aside, hoping no one had seen that. Just as well, because water erupted from the fountain behind her as Ruby came up SWNGNG and soaking wet. Silver Eyes promised murder. Vengeance will be mine, Pyrrha dove to meet her, laughing. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad after all. She moved to meet the raving Reaper, grinning from ear to ear. Do your best. In the days that followed, Team Whippin settled in rather nicely. At least Naruto believed they were. Oh, there was a bit of teething problems at first, as there were in all things. But in good time the K&K began to work themselves out for the most part. Lunch proved little different. What was once meant to be a simple meal soon became a torrid affair that few would forget. 4 tables were dragged across the room crammed together for both team, 2 to each side. Whippin and RVRB sat on the right, while CRDL and JMMN on the left. It made for a mad little hour, but it was strangely wholesome all the same. Naruto rather liked it. Just about all his old friends were here, with some new ones to be boot. All sorts of juicy gossip to be had here. Today was no exception. Seriously, it's not fair. Ruby buried her head in her hands. We trained at the same gym, accusing Silver Eyes narrowed upon them. Why does our team always lose to yours? Her hands slammed down on the table, all but jolting her plate. Even CRDL does better than us. Carden lazily flipped her off across the table. You're also 2 years younger than us, Suo. It was an old argument by now, one Naruto felt only a little chagrined for. Most teams had found their groove by now, while RVRB yet struggled. He supposed it made sense. Ruby was still struggling with the idea that she should be leader of anything, and when you had 2 recluses and a Nora on your team, well, that was a volatile combination to begin with. She'd come into her own, soon. He hoped. She had to. He had faith in her. And so he scratched the back of his head. You'll get there. Trust me, it's just a matter of cohesion. Weiss interjected, lifting her chin and preened like a proud peak CK. Well, that and 2 championship fighters. Push-ups, sit-ups and plenty of juice. Pyrrha chimed in. I'm not sorry. Holy CRP, Yang coughed. Pyrrha just made a joke. Is the world ending? I mean, she backtracked at her siblings' glower. Sorry sis, that's just how it is. Boo! The little Reaper whipped a piece of toast off at her sibling's head. USCK, Yang caught it with her teeth and munched happily. Weiss raised a hand as they ate. So, John and Neo are? Tojder? Nora swallowed another bite of her pancakes. Oh, yeah. There's a story there. Now that she mentioned it, they'd been wondering about that. Yeah, Naruto grinned around a mouthful of muffin. You and Neo. How did that happen? Keen blue eyes found John. Come on, spill. Who made the first move? Melanie and Milsha exchanged a knowing look. Neither. There was a silence. Why do you mean neither? His fellow blonde turned red. Well, Pyrrha leaned in on her elbows, rather curious herself. John looked left. John looked right. John realized all eyes were on him, and summarily, that he'd been had. His lips parted, and were summarily silenced as hand came up over John's mouth. Firm fingers clamped down strong and held fast, holding the words at bay. He turned a baffled blink on Neo. Ah, he sulked. I can't tell them. She shook her head fiercely and lowered her hand. Blake found her voice next. She can't talk. Then how do you two? Scrolls and body language. A rueful grin tugged at John's mouth. Lots of body language. All eyes turned to Neo, who'd somehow managed to squirrel away another gallon of ice cream in the last 5 seconds when nobody was looking. She flashed them a thumbs up. Carden clapped him on the back. That a boy? Carden, oh. Well, Weiss stood with a frown. This has been ... br acing comma, but we have a schedule to keep and homework to do. The rest of Team Whippin blanched. Yang frowned. Are you sure we can't skip those extra lessons? Weiss bridled at that. Certainly not. No privacy these days for them. Naruto groaned. Ugh. Things finally reached a head in Port's class 3 days later. Well, that was when Naruto finally noticed it. If only because Pyrrha couldn't seem to sit still. She just kept squirming. In hindsight, it was a miracle he'd missed it. She was usually so calm in class, so composed, careful never one to let the mask fall anywhere save when they were alone. which they hadn't been for at least 2 weeks now. Tap. Her elbow nudged his side, a desperate cry for attention. Naruto flicked a quick glance at their so-called teacher, found Port all but engrossed in one of his stories, and looked back her way again. "You all right?" Pyrrha didn't answer, not with proper words at least. She slid a folded note across the desk to him. He took it and unwrapped it an instant. A lone line awaited him. "Rooftop tonight, strange." Yang tried to lean over his shoulder and peek, to no avail. Not trusting himself to a note with Yang and Weiss watching, Naruto scooted a bit closer. His hip brushed hers and Pyrrha made a little noise of surprised pleasure. Her lips pursed, not quite understanding until he raised his left hand and made a quick gesture with his fingers. "Training," he flicked 2 fingers back and forth, using the old code they'd concocted as children. She recognized it at once and subtly signed back, eyes gone half-lidded. Of a sort. Well, that didn't allay his suspicions. She was definitely up to something. Weiss noticed. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "He'll notice." Naruto waved her down and sighed once more. "Team." Pyrrha's pale face turned a lovely shade of red. "No." Her motion was stiff, almost choppy. "Alone." "Sure." He nodded. He didn't see the harm in it. She reached across and hooked her pinky finger in his. "Remember? You promised." "Yup." Naruto mirrored her smile. What was the harm in it? Wasn't like they were doing anything wrong. Say what you would about Beacon and its madness, but the nightlife was strangely peaceful. Few were out near midnight, and with most of the training facilities housed indoors, Naruto let her drag him up the last flight of steps. "All right," he released her and turned to face her fully. "We're here. Why did you want to train on the roof?" Pyrrha closed the door behind them and did something with her semblance. He knew, if only because he heard the handle click, despite lacking a lock. All right. Whatever it was, she didn't want to be disturbed. And had she wedged her shield in the latch? All right, now she was starting to make him a little nervous. Privacy. An alarm went off in the back of his head. Naruto ignored it, not quite comprehending what she was up to. "Well," he planted both hands in his pockets, "we've got it now." Pyrrha gave him a strange look. "We certainly do." She sauntered forward, hips swaying as she kicked off her shoes. Naruto frowned, until her skirt hit him in the face. "Ha, neat," his mind chirped. Black lace. There was something new about her smile. It was tiny and shy, yet for all that, he glimpsed something new there. Something that had been simmering for the last few days now. He knew that look, or perhaps it would be better to say he recognized it. He'd seen it a time or two when she was stressed, when things weren't going her way, when he'd missed no shortage of hints. Hunger. "All right, just calm down." He collapsed his weapon and raised a hand. "I know it's been a bit," but her eyes flashed as she reached out and reeled him in. "No." She was quite close now. Terribly close, really. She stepped in with a quiet sigh, looped her arms around his neck, and fastened her mouth to his. A jolt shot through Naruto. Her lips were warm and soft, tasting faintly of berries and sunshine, so much so that he found himself leaning into her embrace despite his earlier reservations. She yielded to him with a pleased hum, reaching around to guide his arms onto hers. She pulled away first. "It's been so noisy these last few days," her voice was breathy whisper as she pulled away. "I can't take it anymore." Small wonder she'd been antsy lately. He grabbed her by the waist, to which she made a pleased noise and dove in again. Her legs swept his, and she rode him down to the roof. Aura cushioned the impact. Even if hadn't, he surely wouldn't have felt it in such a state. His mind had already fizzled out and his attention was firmly elsewhere. Pyrrha sat atop his chest, legs splayed. Green eyes bored into blue. "Don't move." Nimble fingers reached up with infuriating slowness, dancing across the buttons of her blouse. A tantalizing expanse of pale creamy skin greeted his eyes as her bosom was freed. Black lace there, too. There was a wild, glazed look to her green eyes now, and he all but lost himself in them. He leaned up to embrace her as her hips ground against his. She reached down, fumbling with the buttons of his jacket, and behind them, the door to the roof rattled. Pyrrha absolutely hissed. "I swear," she sang with faux sweetness, "if someone opens that door, I'm going to throw them off the roof." The rattling ceased and they heard footsteps retreat rapidly. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Naruto sniggered. Pyrrha snorted, covering her mouth to hide her smile. Before long they were both hopelessly lost in laughter, doubling over as they clutched at themselves and cackled. Naruto finally subsided with a sigh. "You sure about this?" he drawled. "This ain't something you can take back." She leaned down and embraced him again, sweetly this time, tongue tickling at his lips. Her forehead touched his, bright hair tickling his face. "Does that answer your question?" "Yup." The hell was he waiting for again? Probably just as well too, because she lost patience with his clothes and started tearing. His buttons and most of his jacket flew away in a shred of fabric, and soon enough, his trousers joined them. He took the tie that bound her hair in recompense, and her hair spilled down over her shoulders. "Touch me," she begged. No interruptions this time. His hand moved to cup her bare breasts, and she jolted, air in between her teeth. "Cold hands," she gasped out the words. He nearly withdrew. "Sorry," she tilted her neck back, gasping softly. "I didn't say stop." He leaned up to embrace her again at that, twisted his hips, and rolled. She had half an instant to cling to him before she wound up sprawled beneath him. Scarlet tresses sprawled against the ground behind her like a bloody halo, further highlighting her pale skin and striking green eyes. Chest heaving, eyes half-lidded, she gazed up at him for a long moment. And then, "Thank you," Naruto stilled. "What?" Her eyes began to water. "Oi," he reached down, cupping her face. "Why are you crying?" "Because," she sniffled and snickered in the same instant, producing a strange sound caught somewhere between a sigh and a sob. "Because I'm happy." Her hands threaded with his. "Thank you for fighting me that day." She laid an embrace on their interlocked fingers. "Thank you for telling me to be selfish. Thank you for loving me." An awful feeling stirred in his chest. "This is starting to sound like a goodbye, you know." "No." Her eyes flashed. "Never. I just can't help myself. Sometimes I wake up and wonder if this is all dream, if it's even real." His heart skipped a beat. "Of course this is real. But what if it isn't?" "Nope." He swatted her on the nose. "All right. I won't argue." She reached up and pulled him down to her, nuzzling her nose against this. "I'm so glad I met you. Thank you for saving me." "Saved you?" She smiled. "Sounds strange, doesn't it? Still, I can't help but feel that you did." There were no more words after that. The last of their clothes fell away, and she began to move against him. Her skin was soft as satin under his hands. His palms came up under her rear and cupped it, held her fast as he only could. Neither of them knew what they were doing. Neither cared. Together, they fell into carnal bliss. Pyrrha fought like a demon. Say what you would about her manners and behavior in class. When it came to a fight, she was downright vicious. No restraint. Nothing held back. She knew how to fight, and woe betide someone if they got in her way. It wasn't even that she tried to be forceful, nor was it a mean streak. Pyrrha was sweet as sugar. She'd just become a little selfish now. When she fought, she used everything she had. Today, Ruby Rose was learning or recalling that lesson the strong way in combat class. Naruto looked down from the stands and winced a little as his favorite redhead flicked her shield out to catch the little reaper on the chin. He heard the crack. Even from here, one didn't need the meters above to know she had lost a good fourth of her aura with that hit. Ouch. That looked painful. Not enough to stop her, though. Young sidled up beside him. "Look!" Ruby went spinning to the ground, but only for a moment. Scarce had she struck the mat than she bounded back up in a cloud of crimson petals. Pyrrha planted her feet and weathered them with her shield holding firm in the face of the sudden storm. Swept through, seeking the girl in the haze, only for the petals to part and flow around her blade. Down below, Milsha and Melanie hollered their encouragement. "Kick her butt, Red." "Yeah, show her who's boss." Weiss quirked a brown of her own as Ruby materialized and locked weapons with Pyrrha. "Someone's fired up this morning." Naruto coughed into a fist as Pyrrha's sword shifted to become a rifle, turning that giddy grin into a yelp of surprise. Milo barked, propelling Ruby backward with a round of gravity. Dust. Anyone else would have sailed right out of bounds. Not Ruby Rose. She spun and fired in reverse. Sniper propelling her back into the fray. Pyrrha met her gladly. They fell into a storm of blows that drew whistled and catcalls from those watching. They're not the only ones. Still, the goes it was amazing how far they'd come. A single late-night rendezvous turned into several, Within a few weeks, it became something of a routine for him and Pyrrha every other night. She'd inevitably build up stress as the days ground by. Together they'd burn it off at night, be it sparring with their weapons or other things. She'd never been happier. Neither had he. "I know that grin. So?" Young prodded him. With an elbow. "How is she?" Naruto kept his eyes on the fight. "How is who?" "Don't play dumb. You were noisy last night." "Really?" Weiss caught on quickly with a look of absolute dismay. "That was you? On the roof? Have you two no shame?" "Nope, why should they? They cared for one another." He could say that with utmost certainty. Pyrrha ... It wasn't that she completed him, but rather, he felt he could be himself around her. Likewise, she lowered her guard around him. No prim and proper girl here. She'd even been known to cuss a time or two. A cry of pain drew his attention. Back to the bout below. Ruby's aura was shaved off that much more. "Think she can win, Yang?" Followed his gaze with a grimace. "Depends who you're talking about." While they looked on in quiet contemplation, Ruby hooked crescent rose around Pyrrha's shield and yanked. Something sparked in her weapon lightning dust, and the champion recoiled as her muscles spasmed. Ruby seized the moment, using that brief lapse to wrest Pyrrha's arm down to the right, exposing her. In the same instant she levered herself up on the haft of her hulking weapon and kicked. Pyrrha's head snapped back with a crackle of aura. Her recovery was quick, but anyone could see the brief flicker of surprise. In her eyes, John pumped a fist in the air. "Go Ruby!" Ruby drove after her with a holler, pressing the offensive like a berserker. Naruto contented himself with a low whistle instead. Someone upped her training. "Yup." Yang smacked her lips. "She's 2 years younger, after all. How else do you think? She got admitted to Beacon with us? Didn't it have something to do with that dust robbery she broke up? Well, that helped." Yang all but glowed with sisterly pride. "She put a lot of bad guys behind bars, all by herself." Weiss huffed. "I still say she's showing off." Yan's smile slipped into a frown. "Hey, now, that's my sister you're talking about. Care to try your luck, then?" Naruto flashed a Leon card. "She already thrashed John. 100 Leon on Pyrrha." Weiss winced. "You're on," Yang chuckled. "Heh, easy money." Weiss swiped at her arm half-heartedly. "We shall see." Naruto let them squabble and turned his gaze back to the fray. Pyrrha was undoubtedly stronger, but even he could see that Ruby was the more agile, due in no small part to her absurd semblance. It gave her that rare edge that their resident redhead lacked. Not only did it make her devilishly difficult to hit, it gave her strikes sheer momentum. It wasn't that he disliked Ruby. Far from it. She had so much potential, and yet for all that latent ability, he could already see the outcome. Naruto leaned on the rail, face dangerously close to hers. "She's still going to lose." Credit where it was due, Weiss did rise to the bait. "You don't know that." "Listen, you." Yang planted a fist on her hip. "That's my supersonic little sister down there. I practically raised her. Trust me, she's good. Really good." She winced as a cry came from the arena below. "But as much as it pains me to say it, Pyrrha's been at this longer than her." Pyrrha surged forward suddenly, echoing those very words. Naruto saw the sweep coming before Ruby did, if only because he recognized the move. He was intimately familiar with her fighting style. Then again, so was Ruby. She hopped over it and cut down with her scythe in the same instant, retaliating with a vicious overhead sweep. Twin jets opened on the back of the haft, a recent addition meant to lend her swings more staying power, flaring with a pulse of azure fire. She struck like a peal of thunder, death itself striking in a single swipe. Pyrrha saw it coming and turtled up behind her shield. The subsequent impact forced her down to a knee. Ruby grinned. At least Naruto assumed it was a grin from here. It might have been a snarl. All he saw was a gleam of pearly white teeth. She blurred into a second strike, followed by a third and a fourth, each pressing Pyrrha closer and closer to the edge of the ring. Weiss sprang to her feet. "There, she's won." "No," Naruto grimaced. "She hasn't." Yang saw it too and winced. "Bad move, sis." Weiss looked between them both, either unable or unwilling to understand. "You didn't go to the same gym we did." Yang raised a hand, counting down from 5. "She's in range now." Weiss made angry Weiss noises. "I don't understand." "Think of it like this. Naruto planted his chin on a fist. Ruby's semblance is more than just a burst of speed. We've tried telling her that, but she refuses to believe it, and in doing so she handicaps herself. Pyrrha knew this. She'd been luring Ruby in, letting her burn herself out, use up her aura. No longer, for while Ruby was very much a speedy little thing, so too was her mind. More often than not she acted without thinking, moving on instinct, rashly leaping into danger without any regard for her safety. She would be the first to protect innocent, heedless of the risk to herself. Those were heroic traits to be sure, but they were reckless all the same, and she'd blundered. Segments clicked in Pyrrha's shield and Ruby tumbled back as the metal itself bulged outward in the form of a second lance to stab at her face. The younger girl squeaked and ducked aside, unwilling to tank it on her aura or risk her weapon integrity. It only cost her a second. A stumble before she turned to crimson petals and whirled away. A second was all Pyrrha needed. Quick as a flash the second lance folded back into a shield, seemingly inert bronze once more. When Ruby came for her again, Pyrrha did not deign to block with her shield. Not this time. She whipped it at her as one might a deadly discus. Ruby dodged aside, only for the simple shield to bulge outward again, becoming a mighty slab that slammed into her stomach. Spittle flew through the air. Yang whistled. That wasn't magnetism. The hell was that? Oh, that? Naruto whistled innocently. Did you know semblances can evolve? Lilac eyes flashed into red. Since when? Since forever. His grin was nothing short of smug. What did you think would happen once Pyrrha actually got comfortable using hers? What's a step up from polarity? Weiss answered first. Well, that would be outright magnetism, or full control of metal, perhaps even creating her own O. She blinked rapidly as realization dawned. Touched a finger to her chin. Oh, that's broken. Naruto pivoted to watch the brawl reach its conclusion. That a girl. You should see Pyrrha when she's really trying. Weiss created a tiny glyph in her palm, considering it as one might a fine jewel. I wonder. Yang stared at her fists, taking the words to heart. Ha! Semblances can evolve? Pyrrha didn't even bother to use hers again. When the next swing came she ceased all resistance and swayed back, spine nearly parallel to the ground. Velocity and momentum did the rest. Deprived of its target and unable to reverse course in time, Crescent Rose slammed into the ring with an awful crunch, wedging the blade within. Weiss wilted anew. Ruby balked. Ah, poop. Naruto and Yang knew the younger could abandon her weapon and go hand to hand. Such lessons had been drilled into every student of the Leaf Gym, but Pyrrha never gave her a chance. She whirled and drove her right heel into Ruby's solar plexus in a devastating kick that all but hurled her out of bounds. High above, her aura went into the red with a flat whine. Miss Goodwitch raised her weapon. The match is over. You hurt her. Naruto held up his hand. Pay up, Ice Queen. Weiss slammed the money into his palm. I hope you choke on it. Nah. Yang swept past and took her cut. Thanks for the finder's fee, though. A quick flip swung Naruto over the edge of the stands. From there he hit the ground at a brisk trot. Yang was only a heartbeat behind, while Weiss followed at a more sedate pace, languidly using a line of glyphs to walk her way down, rather than give half the class a look up her skirt. Such a show-off. I'm sorry, Pyrrha's voice rang ahead of him as they drew near. I think I went a little too strong. Blurg. He reached Ruby just in time to see the warrior haul the stunned upright and whisper something else in her ear. Whatever she said went unheard, but it had Ruby perking up. Really? You believe in me? Definitely. Pyrrha patted her head. You nearly had me there. I'd be happy to train. Oi, Yang bowled forward to cut them off. Hands off the sister. I saw her first. Ruby whirled, cheeks red. Yahong, it's not like that. Naruto and Weiss exchanged a bemused look. Trying to steal her away, are we? Naruto raised his voice in a teasing tone to make himself heard. Should I be concerned? Pyrrha pounced. There was no transition between one moment and the next. For a fleeting second she was with Ruby, then she was next to him. Her arm looped around his, pulling him close. That was the only warning he received. Then her mouth was on his, tongue ruthlessly plundering his mouth. It was a brief embrace, deep, yet fleeting. His head spun as she pulled away. Are you proud of me? Of course I am. Naruto touched his forehead to hers. Did I ever mention how much I love you? She shivered a little beneath his praise. Could you say it again? He embraced her nose. Such a glutton. Ahem, someone coughed. Vaguely, he remembered they weren't alone. Worse, a certain teacher was staring at them. Miss Goodwitch slapped her CRP into an open palm. If the two of you are quite done, Pyrrha held up a finger, embraced him again, then pulled away. All right. She wiped her mouth shamelessly. I'm good. Have at it. Now then, we have just enough time for a brief match. Their teacher coughed to hide a hint of red in her cheeks and considered her scroll. Would anyone else care to face Miss Nikos? Ruby squeaked. Blake shook her head. Nope. Nora and Ren mirrored it. Nothing. Kyowu, Milsha and Melanie looked defiant, but neither dared raise their hand. Silence reigned supreme. And then, Neo's hand slammed into the air. Those around her backed away at speed. Even her own team retreated, wary of the sheer, murderous aura stemming from her shoulders. Naruto knew it well. Hey, Pyrrha? She shifted a little in his arms. Yes, Naruto? I think you might have gone a little too strong on John. She followed his gaze and winced. Oh, dear. Perhaps you're right, Weiss blinked. How can you tell? That ... demon looks the same to me. Yang and Naruto exchanged a bland look. Demon? Was Weiss that terrified of her? You don't know Neo. The former found her voice first. That's her angry face. She only smiles like that when she's about to stab someone. The little terror drew hush from the scabbard of her parasol and pointed it at them. It was not a pleasant smile. No, hers was a grin that promised a complete and utter thrashing. Not an idle threat that Neo had always been one of the more capable students back in the gym. Her record spoke for itself. Weiss pursed her lips, forming a thin line. Why would she be angry? Maybe because Pyrrha beat her man down in the last match, she scoffed. Ark acquitted himself rather well, I think. Come on, he only got one hit in, and that was pity. John finally made a grab for his partner's arm. Neo, no. You're not fighting her. His fingers passed through an illusion, heralded by the faint shattering of glass. Naruto looked down to find the little minx less than a foot away, glowering up at them. No, he realized, not him. Pyrrha. Those mismatching eyes were fixed upon the champion with keen intent, half-lidded with purpose. Pyrrha wriggled free from his grasp and moved to face her. Do you really want to fight me that badly? Her head bobbed in a curt nod. Pyrrha straightened. Then another hand rose. I'll do it. All eyes turned toward them. Fellow students parted once more, revealing a new challenger. Naruto pivoted on one heel as well. He soon wished he hadn't. Blue orbs glimpsed bright eyes. The color of poison honey and dark hair, framed by a small smile. Really, she could have been Blake's sister at a glance. Much like Neo, she ignored him outright. Those glimmering gold orbs were fixed upon Pyrrha, to the exclusion of all else. She wore the signature uniform of an upper year, and that alone set him ill at ease. Why did he have a bad feeling about this? Miss Fall. Glinda considered her clipboard. So nice of you to join us for once. I'll allow it. Neo stomped a foot. You're welcome to fight in the next class. Goodwitch chastised. Let someone else have a turn. Her riding CRP swiped out again. Combatants, to the ring. We have little time. Fall went first, hips swaying as she sashayed toward the arena. Naruto tried not to look. He really did. But it was impossible. Even Miss Goodwitch was looking. Pyrrha frowned and all but stalked after her. He heard them speak as they walked. That was a fine bout. Her smile was warm, even if her eyes weren't. Someone taught you well. Pyrrha tilted her head, smile false as summer snow. And you are? Cinder. The upper year smiled. Cinder Fall. 3rd year. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Pyrrha. Her brown turned stormy. You know me? By reputation, only. Oomph. Now she'd really be in a foul mood. If there was one thing Pyrrha loathed, it was being reminded of her past. On stage at last. She settled into a stance. Cinder grinned and reached for her weapons with a smile Naruto made. A gesture behind his back. The bell rang. It was like breaking a spell. Glinda blinked, somewhat taken back. Already? Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Weiss flung up her arms. Blast. Why is everyone here always such a tease? None saw Naruto's smile, nor noticed Neo's lower arm. It didn't even occur to them that the bell had rung a good minute early. That Fire Beach, she had a bad feeling about her. She wasn't sure why or what, only that she did. Sure, she wanted to fight Red Pyrrha, but only to make a point. Nobody messed with her boy, no matter how angry she might be. She didn't want to kill her. That wouldn't be any fun. To say nothing of the consequences. Anyone who actually tried would be rendered a smear on the ground by her team. Yet for a moment there, she could have sworn she'd seen murderous intent in Cinder's eyes. Perhaps she'd imagined it. Whether she hadn't or not, it changed nothing. Besides, she owed Blondie a favor, so she'd played a trick, a harmless use of her semblance to get Pyrrha out of her bout. Goodwitch wouldn't fall for such a trick again, not by the way she was looking at her. Busted. They both knew it. Still, she'd learned something from this. Naruto didn't want Pyrrha to fight Cinder. It wasn't Neo's place to ask why. She'd done as he asked. She had a feeling that if they ever fought, something terrible would happen. Are we sure it's her? It might not be. Minato considered the report on his desk with thinly veiled anticipation. You're certain about this? He raised his gaze to regard a less than pleased Jiraiya. These were his words, more or less. The aging sage folded both arms before his broad chest. Rin and Obito were thorough. Maybe a little too much so. After a moment's pause, he let the other shoe drop. We even sent Roman in to be sure. He got a bit more out of the poor BSTRD than we did. Minato grimaced. I dislike his semblance. Jiraiya mirrored it. On that, they were in agreement. So do I, but there's no denying it's useful, and he is on our side. We wouldn't have Neo without him. Fair enough. So, what's the next move? Tyrion had sang like a canary under Genjutsu. That was precisely the problem. In his final moments he had revealed things. Interesting things. Worrying things. Intelligence that threatened to alter not only their plans in this world, but the very shape of Remnant itself. Someone had to look into it. I can go. Jiraiya volunteered. I'm not that rusty. No. Minato stifled a cough against his first. I'll handle it. There it was again. That faint hitch in his breath that concerned him. He tried to hide it. Really, for the most part he succeeded. But not from him. Never him. He'd known Minato since he was a boy. He knew his tells. He could see it in the bags under his skin, the way his right hand trembled just so. Are you sure? Sensei, let me do some good while I still can. I'll be back in a few days. He reached for his cloak and mask. Be sure to keep an eye on the brats. Right, came the sigh. Although if they keep at it like that, you might have a few grandchildren in the next few years. Minato walked into a wall and bounced off with a startled grunt. For a moment, a sliver of second, his facade slipped. He almost looked alive. Grandbabies? A spark of light shone in his dull blue eyes. Kushina would love that. And now they came to the cusp of the problem. She's dead, Minato. You don't know that. His former student spoke quickly. Too quickly. We never found a body. Don't do this. Don't go chasing ghosts. Jiraiya winced at the hope in his words. You have a son, and probably a daughter-in-law, soon. Be there for them. Minato bridled. I have been. Have you? A pale brow quirked. Naruto asked for you at initiation. Who do you think's been running your gym the last year? He jerked a thumb at his chest. Me. Rin's got a little one on the way. Obito too busy fussing over her, and we haven't heard from Kakashi in a week. Meaning he's probably up to something. You're needed here. And I will be, I promise. After this. I need to be sure. There was no arguing with him when he was like this. Minato tugged on his mask. All right, then. Time for work. This is boring. I want some action. Action. A bored yawn was a dangerous yawn, Pyrrha found. Just another lesson she'd learned from the leaf. Gym. When a wild yawn was bored, a wild yawn got mischievous. Such mischief could manifest in any number of ways. A fit of pique, a prank, or sometimes outright disaster. One never knew. Be careful what you wish for. Miss Nikos, a voice chimed from the speakers set into the ceiling. Your father is here to see you, I repeat. Pyrrha's world shrank to a single point of existence. No, panic bleated in her heart, threatening to undo all that she'd said. All that she'd done. Is that so? Naruto stood and snatched up his gauntlet. The dust crystals hummed to life within, all 6 of them. All right, he grinned. Let's go. A hysteric giggle burst from her. Naruto, no, you can't break his legs. Young climbed up after him. All right, I'll bite. Always wanted to meet the a-hole your dad smacked around. Weiss frowned. This sounds like a personal affair. Would you rather I stay here? She was learning. Not move herself into every aspect of their lives as she once had. No, you should meet him. Naruto's smile was all teeth. He makes you look tame. Weiss all but flung herself out of bed. Now this I have to see. Only then did Pyrrha realize they all had their weapons. Heh, Team W-Pin was full-armed. She really did love her team. You can't choose your family. Be it brother or sister, mother and father, or even aunts and uncles, BLD was BLD. It might be a pain at times, but one learned to live with the madness that was one's family. Because at the end of the day, be it peace or crisis, when all else fades away, family is all you have. Family has your back. At least, they should. Naruto subscribed to this mantra more than most. After all, his family was absolutely batshit crazy. So much so that he'd become inured to their unique brand of insanity long ago. Minato did his darndest to be a single father and run a gym in tandem, but he had help on that front. When the chips were down, he could always count on Uncle Kakashi, Aunt Rin, or even Uncle Obito to pick up the slack. Even Grandpa Jiraiya was known to lend a hand from time to time. Pyrrha wasn't so lucky. To be fair, Naruto never had the pleasure of meeting Caesar Nikos, nor his fist the man's face. Until this moment. He'd not heard good things about the former champion. Man was in butt. Through and through. Still, he was pleased to see that Weiss and Yang felt the same. They must, because they looked just as wary toward the Nikos patriarch. He didn't have to worry about a lack of unity on that front. Poor Pyrrha. She looked miserable. On a whim he reached for her hand. Evidently it was the right thing to do, because her palm pounced on his, fingers greedily slipping through his own. Her eyes flitted to his, and he thought he saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips. Caesar definitely noticed it, because he turned a fascinating shade of puce. BSTRD looked like he was having a good. Now if he could just figure out what Pyrrha's old man was doing out here in the courtyard, looking like he'd been hung out to dry. That'd be great. No, he didn't trust him, and he didn't trust this, not for a single second. Wise of you. A little voice whispered in the back of his head. And here I took you for a simpleton. Pipe down, Fur. Naruto muttered between his teeth. I don't have time for your sniping. Wait, you're aware of me? Aware and meaning to have a long conversation with you. Might need you in a minute. Why? How do you feel about scaring the PSS out of an asshat? A beat of silence followed. I take back what I said. You and we're gonna get along just fine. Naruto tugged himself back to reality as Pyrrha muttered a half-hearted greeting, one her father reluctantly returned. As one, he exchanged a glance with Weiss and Yang. Together, the trio kept Pyrrha between them. Caesar Nikos wouldn't take his daughter from Beacon without a fight. Actually, scratch that. He wouldn't be taking her at all. So they swore. Pyrrha found him there in the courtyard. Caesar Nikos was not as she remembered. Once he'd been proud, larger than life, and far too full of himself. Now he was heavier, his trim form nowhere to be seen, a double chin hidden behind a scraggly red beard. The sight of him took her aback. She knew. He'd retired from the tournament scene long ago, but to let himself go like this. That he was smiling only set her on edge. She'd not fall for his honeyed words. Hello, daughter. At least he had pleasant words for her, for the time being. You look lovely as ever. Young C. cut a brow. Smooth talker, this one. Father. Pyrrha lifted her chin in naked defiance. Why are you here? Straight to business, then. He winced a little. You always were like your mother. A seed of anger sprouted in Pyrrha's chest. This was father at his worst slimiest, that he was patronizing her at all. Promised nothing good. Still, she refused to be baited by his juvenile attempts to rile her. She would not show fear. She was the bigger person here. He seemed to struggle with the words. I have come to beg your forgiveness. She didn't believe him. Not for a moment. Caesar Nikos did not apologize. To apologize was to admit defeat. He never did. She'd known this day would come. Even after she'd cut all ties with him. He wanted something for her. He always did. Whether it was for her to come home, to have her compete in the tournaments again, or simply to have her under his thumb, she knew not. Whatever it was, she wasn't having it. And then he said the words. "Pyrrha, your mother, she isn't well, she doesn't have much time left." Her world rocked. That's a lie. She was perfectly healthy the last time we spoke. And when was that? Father's face closed down. Pyrrha's mouth clicked shut. She knew the answer. Years. She'd all but cut her family out of her life. With good reason. She turned away mail, blocked their calls, refused to interact with them. In any way, shape, or form. She'd done so if only because she feared exactly this, some insidious attempt to pull her back into the fold. "We tried calling you, but you kept ignoring us." He straightened a little when Yang made an offended noise. "Thus, I had no choice but to confront you. Directly. You know how she gets when she's upset." Naruto stepped up on her right side, gripping her hand, a hand in his own. "And I wonder how much of this has to do with you. You must be Minato's boy. You resemble him well." "Thanks ever so much. Dad told me to punch you if I ever saw you." "I'm game." Yang all but materialized on her left, seizing her free hand. "What do you say?" Pyrrha felt her self-control begin to waver. Were they really standing up for her? Even knowing her father's reputation, his power, his prestige? Minato wasn't here to intervene this time. If father tried to force the issue, a pang of dread hit her, stealing her joy. No. She didn't want it back. She didn't want to leave Beacon. She didn't want to be the Invincible Girl again. Yes, she was worried about mother, but this reeked of a setup. "Do you have any proof?" A new voice chimed. Pyrrha snapped back to reality. Weiss surprised her and the lot of them by taking point, all but move herself between her and a startled Caesar. "How dare you?" Now there was the outrage she was so accustomed to. "I did not come all this way to be questioned by children." "Children, you say?" Weiss's smile was pure Jack at his worst. "Do you have any idea who we are?" A pause stretched between them. "Who I am," Caesar blinked. Then the color drained out of his face like a broken sieve. "You?" Naruto sniggered. Weiss ate it up. "Me." As Pyrrha looked on their resident, she seeked her slim form to one side and planted a fist upon a slender hip. A move so utter reminiscent of Yang that Pyrrha couldn't help but smile. Naruto hooted, even as the former pumped a fist into the air. Seemed she'd rubbed off on her in more ways than one. Thank the gods for that. Caesar looked like he'd bitten into a lemon. "Why are you here?" "Why ever wouldn't I be? I am Weiss Schnee, daughter of Jacques Schnee." She lifted her chin just so, adopting a haughty tone so natural that one might think it natural, were it not for the tightness of her eyes. "I can do as I wish, and go where I please, and that's my teammate you're slandering. I'll ask you again. What proof do you have of her mother's ill health?" Caesar Nikos made a noise of discontent, stepped back, eyeing this diminutive slip of a girl as one might a greater Ursa. Pyrrha found it an apt comparison. Weiss could glare a grim into SBM-sen. "Do not impugn my honor, Schnee." Somehow, the man who was once her father managed to cross both arms over his barrel chest and rally. "This is a family affair. I'm so very glad you said that." Naruto stepped forth, touching a free hand to his chest. "Because, guess what? Pyrrha is family to us." Pyrrha startled a little. "And you?" Weiss flicked a long look up and down the length of Caesar. "What do you know of family? I dare say my little brother could best you in a duel, you fat fop of a fool, and he isn't even trained." "You dare?" "Indeed I do, good sir." Weiss flicked her tongue in outright dismissal. "Now present your proof or leave." "Ha!" Yang grinned. "Love it when our leader gets beaky." "Language." Pyrrha hid a smile behind her palm. True, the Nikko family were indeed prestigious both in Vale and Mistral, but they were nothing compared to the Schnees. They stood apart. They had no equal. There was a reason father had never crossed them. Only a fool would offend the best no supplier of dust to the world. But that didn't matter. She didn't want to look at father, didn't want to consider his words. She wanted him gone. Why couldn't he just leave? Still, however much she hated him, to hear that mother wasn't doing well, the thought soured her stomach and silenced her smile. "What do you expect? A picture or some such?" Caesar flung up his arms. She's in a coma. You need only see for herself. He fumbled in his wallet for a piece of paper and all but shoved it into her trembling hands. See for yourself. She's been brought back to Mistral for the finest care I can provide. This is the address. You need only ask for her. Pyrrha's fist curled around it. And you want me to what? Visit? A hint of avarice shone through that greasy smile of his. If you were to return, perhaps lend me a bit of money. He rubbed his hands together. I could see my way to ensuring her care continues. Naruto snarled. Young started forward, only for Weiss to reel her back. Pyrrha felt her shoulders slump. Money, of course. It was always about money. She did still have the funds from her tournament days. It was not an unsubstantial amount. Father wanted it, of course. He always wanted what she had, craved her fame and glory like his own bygone days. To see him now, after all this time, stirred old feelings in her, emotions she'd thought long since forgotten. Here at last, she understood. She hated him. Perhaps she always had. Perhaps he was telling the truth. Perhaps not. She would ascertain it for herself. Without him, a thought struck Pyrrha then. Do you still have that pacemaker? Caesar's pale face furrowed in a confused frown. I do. Why? Good. Then I can kill you without even touching you. Her eyes narrowed. And I will, if you don't leave this instant. You have until the count of 3. Daughter? 1, Weiss began. You cannot be serious. 2. Young chirruped happily. This is absurd, Caesar sputtered. Surely you won't. Naruto's eyes flashed red like balefire, accompanied by a pulse of demonic chakra. 3, Caesar Nikos scarpered. Minato considered the tower in the distance with a keen blue eyes. There was no security to be found in the gremlins. Almost as if Salem were waiting for him. Steeling himself, the blonde walked on. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. She saw him. Not through her eyes, but those of countless nevermore wheeling in the skies above. Just as planned. This Minato. Clearly he won't be beaten by conventional means. Salem tilted her head. Perhaps a more subtle approach is required. Salem stood from her throne and wrapped her magic about herself. It was a physical strain to cloak herself as such, but she felt herself adequate to the task. Only then did she consider her reflection, and her now pale blonde hair. A pale hand, no longer chalk-white and rimmed with pulsing red veins, reached up and unbound her flaxen tresses, leaving them to cascade down her back. Aqua. Blue eyes stared back at her, framed by a smug smile. Yes, she turned, considering herself. I believe that will do. She frowned down at her dark robes. When was the last time she'd worn anything else? Perhaps a change of clothes, she murmured. Wouldn't do be recognized. Hazel, fetch me my wardrobe, and prepare a feast. The giant granted her a gravelly sigh. As you command. Pyrrha was grateful for the change to fight again. Despite all her team had said and done, stress had lingered over her like a low cloud for the last week, polluting her every thought. Not even her late-night sessions with Naruto had been enough to quell her anxiety. It ate at her like a physical thing, hollowing her out from within. So when Neo, a certain midget, volunteered again in Glinda's class, she was all too happy to oblige. Neo was a fighter through and through. Better yet, she wasn't a contender for Naruto's heart, which meant she could fight to her heart's content. Distantly she heard her team holler encouragement, but it was faded now, muted, distant to her ears. Neapolitan fought differently from others. Much like Pyrrha, she had a skill set all her own. Unlike her, Neo had taken to Minato's training with a singular enthusiasm. The leaf gem had honed her, sharpened her, while she had busied herself with her new life and all the happy trappings that came with it. This little hellion worked herself to the bone, and she was rather cross with her at the moment. All the better. Pyrrha wanted a real fight, not a slaughter. She needed to vent. Miss Goodwitch swung her CRP down. They lunged, and the world spun on. Kakashi frowned at the ceiling of the tent. Really, it was a very nice tent. Large, spacious, and why the hell was he here? Where are my clothes? He blinked once, then touched a hand to his forehead. Why do I have a hangover? He rolled over and beheld a pair of bleary BLD red eyes staring back at him. Raven Branwen stretched sleepily, granting him a generous view of her bosom and bare body besides. Morning, handsome. Kakashi's world ground to a halt. One word emerged. Irk. Perhaps had he listened, he might have heard familiar laughter. You sure that was a good idea, getting him drunk like that? Yup. Obito materialized with a swirl of air. 100 Lien says she falls in love with him. No bet. Rin didn't look up from her magazine. Sensei could charm the breathe off a frigid beach like good witch. Hey, and there goes my ship. Tough luck, Buster. Now see me and gimme a massage rub. She wiggled her bare shoulders at him. I'm sore, and you know I can't move like I used. 2. The wayward trickster sighed, but did as he was bade. The things I do for my PRGNT wife. She swatted him with the magazine. I heard that, his laughter redoubled. You were meant to, Pyrrha whimpered. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. There. Naruto bore with her grumbling patiently as he dabbed a bit of gauze to her cheek. I told you Neo was in one of her moods. Just what the hell has she been doing? Pyrrha wriggled in his lap, wincing a little as he tended to her wounds. I barely got a hit in. She just wouldn't go down. And ouch, she yelped. Be careful, that stings. Hold still. Naruto sighed, dabbing her cut with a bit of cloth. Really, that was reckless. She glared at him out of the corner of her eye. I'm not sorry. On a whim, he pulled her close. WHD say to a date this weekend? Would that help calm you down? Pyrrha perked up in his lap. Yes, and you're forgiven. Someone was knocking at their door. Naruto stumbled out of bed, glowered at the ghastly hour indicated by his clock, and staggered to the door. Fumbling fingers closed around the latch and flung it open. He looked up, then down, frowned. Ruby Rose beamed back at him, impossibly perky despite the early hour. I've come for training. Distantly he heard her words, but his brain didn't quite catch up. It's a weekend. He heard her at last and scowled. Why are you awake this early? Please, you and Neo are the only ones who can hold a candle to Pyrrha, and now there's that cinder girl. She clasped both hands before her chest. I'm falling behind. It was entirely too early for this. Then why not ask Neo, she balked. No. I'll die. I want alive. Look, Ruby, it's early. I'm really tired. I'll buy you ramen for a month. He perked up at once. Sold. 3 days passed in relative peace. Weiss counted them down with palpable dread, expecting an attack at any given moment. And yet none came. Bar that brief interruption, their idyllic days continued unabated. Even after a full 72 hours, and neither hide nor hair was seen of Caesar Nikos. Indeed, Team W Pin the name had started to groan on her somewhat carried on, as they always had. Naruto provided spotty training for Pyrrha. She studied, and as for Young, well, she was young. The less said about her puns the better. No one wanted to address the issue. She couldn't blame them. Families were awful and mess. They had a habit of taking a neat, orderly life and throwing it all into violent disarray. Finally, it reached a head for their team. Well, half. To her credit, she managed to wait until Naruto and Pyrrha went out on the town for a well-earned weekend respite. They deserved it. It gave her time to come up with a plan. Had a feeling you'd pull this sooner or later. Yang bounced on the bed beside her, snapping her back to reality. Has Whittle Weiss cream gone soft? A glyph sprang to her fingers. Care to repeat that? Come on, I think it went well, don't you? She shrugged. We drove him off. Did we? No. Weiss planted a hand on her hip. Or did he make a tactical retreat? Say what you will about their methods, but the Nikos family is not without their own resources. Her lips pursed, recalling another father she wasn't predisposed toward. They can make life rather difficult for us and Pyrrha, if we leave them unchecked for much longer. Yang planted a fist in her palm. So let's check 'em. Strong. Well. Her partner was taking the initiative. Color her impressed. Why, Xiaolong, Weiss crossed one leg over the other and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It would seem I underestimated you. You know, this is kinda nice. Isn't it? Pyrrha's head embraced his shoulder. It is. Naruto agreed wholeheartedly as he sprawled out in the grass beside her. It's nice to just relax for once. Without our noisy teammates? She giggled a little into his neck. I suppose. A picnic really wasn't something one considered when relaxing. But this did put a smile on his face. They'd chosen the park at random and gotten more than a few odd looks for lazing about rather than eating. But really, it was the sentiment that mattered. Food could come later. For now the day was theirs. So? His partner asked apropos of nothing. How badly did you beat Ruby? A bead of sweat ran down Naruto's brow. He looked away. No idea what you're talking about. Naruto, I'm not blind. Green eyes pinned him. She looks up to you, adores you like the brother she never had. A finger poked his cheek, denting it a little. You've been taking her training seriously, haven't you? Maybe. Pyrrha propped herself up on one elbow. How strong did you push her this time? Nothing to be gained by lying. No broken bones if that's what you're worried about. Maybe a few bruises. Bit of aura exhaustion. Pyrrha elbowed him. That's more than a little. Meh, she'll live. Sighed. She asked for it. Really? Ruby kicked the door open, stumbled into her dorm, and pumped a dirty fist in the air. I won. Nora bounced upright in her bunk. Won what? What happened to you? Blake looked up from her book. You look like you got run over by a bus. A sniff. Smell like it, too. The little reaper flopped onto her bunk with a weary smile. I actually managed to hit him this time. Ruby, I wouldn't call that a victory. Let me have this, Ren. Anyway, the days is ours. Anything you want to do? Pyrrha pursed her lips. Such an innocent inquiry. Her mind said otherwise. He'd corrupted her. Ideas swelled in her head, none of them tame. Granted, they were in a public place, but when had that stopped them before? She tucked herself a little closer, fingers hooking in the waistband of his jeans. She touched a finger to the corner of her mouth. I can think of a few things. Heat flooded his face in a rare blush. Pyrrha. Kidding. She waved him down. I'm kidding. It's been so long since we've had proper time to ourselves. Maybe I'm just giddy. HRMPH, he grunted, but didn't budge when she tucked herself into his side. Whatever you say. They lay therein. Companionable silence for what felt like an eternity. You know, he mused, if we go any further into the city, there's a chance we'll be recognized. Probably. The silence grew awkward. Are you sure you don't want to talk about no? She winced at the sharpness of her reply and amended it. No. We'll save your mom, Pyrrha. He pulled her closer. I promise. I'm sure Weiss is already cooking up something. And if it fails, a grin. Brute force hasn't let me down yet. If worst comes to worse, we'll get her out the strong way. Pyrrha made pleased Pyrrha noises. Then, can we stay here, eh? Little longer? Sure. He looked an arm around her waist as she cuddled close. This was fine. He didn't need anything more than this. Fate had other plans. The very next day saw them dragged before Headmaster. Weiss planted a fist on her hip. What business do you have with my teammates? Shall I fetch our lawyers? Ozpin smiled. I only require a moment of Naruto's time, nothing more. Pyrrha didn't budge. Anything you have to say to him. You can in front of us. She half expected anger at that remark. She only received a sigh instead. Such solidarity. Ozpin shook his head. I had thought tell you before the news spread, but if you all wish to know. Naruto stilled. Weiss didn't like the look of it. Yang and Pyrrha even less. The former flailed her arms. Well, don't keep us in suspense. Ozpin laid a broken kunai on his desk. Weiss didn't recognize it. The others did. Yang gasped. Pyrrha physically recoiled. Naruto just stared. And then came the words. I am afraid your father has passed away. Pyrrha saw it in that moment, the instant the light died in her partner's eyes. What? Again. Ruby scrambled upright. I'll get you this time. Just watch. Naruto didn't say anything beyond that. He merely quirked a brow, took a stance, and waved her on. Ruby knew better than to look a gift horse in the mouth. Or was it a fox? Didn't matter. He'd been more intense since the news about his dad. Almost worryingly so. If he wanted to train with everyone, she'd not let him down. Anything to keep her from seeing his tears again. Anything to distract him. Anything. She owed his dad that much. Minato had been a good guy. Like the second parent she'd never had. Always there with a smile and a kind word. A bit of advice when she was stuck. A stern hand when she needed someone to push her past his limits. Sure, he was a bit strict in the gym, but that was because he had to be. If he hadn't been, she and Yang never would have improved. Now that was gone and Naruto was flailing, looking for a way out, for an outlet, for something, anything to take the pain away. Just thinking of it made her heart hurt. Ruby wouldn't let him lose anyone else. Not like they'd lost Mom. She swore it. Silver eyes flashed as flared her semblance and vanished in a curtain of crimson petals. Naruto watched her with a keen eye, idly observing her movements as she became a streak of petals so much like her namesake. She'd increased her speed once again. He didn't budge, even when she began to run rings around him. Faster. Dirt kicked up, forming a faster still. Her eyes stung with tears from the wind alone. Even faster now, but she dared not act yet, not with his eyes on her. He'd just counter here again. Where the heck was Yah? Pyrrha burst through the cloud of dust with a workry, slamming her shield into the back of his head. Naruto casually tanked it on his aura, whirled, and slammed a Rasengan into her stomach. Pyrrha crashed back with a yelp, aura sparking. The clash lasted all of an instant. His eyes didn't leave hers, not once. Darn. His fist slammed into the ground, ready to destroy her footing and make her easy prey, just as he had before. Double darn. A dark ribbon wrapped around his wrist and yanked him backward, upsetting his balance. Ren swept in from the side, raking his back with gunfire to distract Hai. In the same instant, a streak of white raced past. Mirtanaster flicked out, striking his shoulder. A gravity glyph bloomed there, slowing him. Just a little, just a hair. Ruby nearly lost her footing at the sight. Apparently Weiss had finally learned how to tag people with her glyphs now. Had her semblance finally evolved over the last week? Scary. Also unfair. Naruto swore and hacked it away with a knife. But in that instant Pyrrha was on him with a mad grin, forcing him to fend off a storm of blows. Young waited in SWNGNG with her, and together the duo forced him back again, raging across the yard in a storm of burning gold and scarlet. He kicked the ladder away and folded the other over his knee, headbutting her away. Neo and John swept in while he was distracted, one raking her blade across his back, the other bashing him in the face with his shield. Aura crackled and he buckled. Better, a laugh tore out of him. Don't stop now. He was still struggling upright when one of Nora's grenades whistled in, blinding him. She saw movement in the smoke and could only assume Melanie and Milsha had engaged. Definitely, because there they went, hurtling out of the smoke with a yelp. There, an opening. Ruby dove forward, lunging under his first to reappear beneath him. Smug silver eyes blazed up into startled blue, then launched her entire body upward, ramming a heel into his chin. Naruto's head snapped back with a startled grunt. What did Minato call this move? Primary something or other. In the head of the battle she couldn't remember the name. She had the bandages hidden in her sleeves ready for this. She'd trained, prepared for this moment. Now to an arm caught her ankle and then, quite suddenly the word upended. She squeaked and flailed, pushing down her skirt. Naruto grinned down at her, a thin line of BLD running down his nose. Thank you, Ruby. I needed that. Well, here came the knockout blow. Crap baskets. Aura crackled. Star burst before her vision. Pyrrha didn't know what to do. She simply did not know. Her mind was all ajumble, her thoughts hopelessly tangled, her feelings coiled into tight red knots. Things had been bad enough when Naruto was saddened over Minato's death, then angry, but this went well beyond the pale. He wasn't raging or shouting or drinking, or even depressed by the news anymore. He'd gone into full denial. It hurt to see him like this, but it hurt even more to know that a part of her almost preferred it, because at least he was smiling now. Dad's not dead, he kept saying whenever anyone tried to broach the subject with him. He can't be. He'll come back. This is all part of his plan. You'll see. It was driving her mad. How could she calm him? How could she soothe the fiery flames of his heart? Pyrrha knew there must be a way, but to find it, she had to. She must. He wouldn't listen to anyone else. Not Yang, and certainly not Weiss, nor Ruby, or even the Malachites. There had to be a way to crack that outer shell of his. If there was, she'd yet to find it. Nearly a week had passed since he'd descended into this phase of his, with no end in sight. She flung herself down onto her bed with a pensive sigh. Someone answered. For the love off, just bang him again or something. Pyrrha's head snapped up. Yang, no, Yang, yes. A familiar pair of lively lilac eyes glared at her from opposite bunk, framed by an impish grin. Look, the two of you are clearly overthinking things here. Bonk him, bang him, whatever floats your boat. Helps get the bad stuff right out. Works like a charm for me, and her hands flew up seemingly of their own volition and sealed over her mouth. Weiss poked her head down from the bunk above and glared her way. You and whom? Yong's visage went paler than snowfall. Nothing. You didn't hear sit, Pyrrha hid the ghost of a smile one hand. You clearly said, nope, I didn't say nothin', stubborn girl. Weiss sighed before fixing her with a pensive look. Xialong's not-so-script paramour aside, the two of you have been together for quite some time, no? A glum nod on her part. We have. Naruto and I knew one another long before his father founded the Leaf Gym. Yang dove on the topic like a drowning woman would a life raft. Best DMN gym ever. Maybe we could head down there again this weekend. Weiss glared icy daggers her way. Xialong. Yeah, Weissicle? Hush. Hushing, Pyrrha couldn't quite strangle the grinning giggle that escaped her lips at their antics. It was so easy to forget that she wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. Yang and Weiss were her teammates too. After all, they might have rubbed off on one another, but they were just as concerned for Naruto's well-being as she. It humbled her. Weiss pushed the proverbial envelope an extra inch. Had you tried talking to him? I've already did that. You clearly haven't done it properly, if he's still being this pig-headed. She huffed and tossed her ponytail over one shoulder. Corner him somewhere, fight him if you have to, wear him down until he can't get away, then have it out with him. Fight Naruto? Pyrrha's BLD sang at the thought, an explosive little thrill that had quickened her pulse and her rubbing her thighs. Together atop the bed. It had been some time since they'd gone at one another for real. Perhaps. Where was the harm? Leave it to Weiss to attack the situation with overwhelming logic. Maybe that was what she needed here. Logic. Beat him down with cold logic, then turn on the passion to burn his anger away. It sounded silly, cliché even, but it was the only idea she had. Even a bad plan was better than no plan at all. All right, I'll talk to him. Good. Weiss nodded sagely. Then, bang him. Yang hooted and fell clear off her bed, legs kicking in the air. Pyrrha choked on her own air, gagged, managed to swallow somehow. Only then did she squeak, Weiss? But not here in the dorm, the Schnee continued unabated, heedless to her increasingly red face and Yang's howls of laughter. Preferably someplace quiet. It's rather late after all, and we need our beauty sleep. Pyrrha leaped to her feet. Weiss? Maybe the rooftop? I believe he's up there now. Weiss, Pyrrha's retreat became a full-blown rout. Her team's laughter chased her out their dorm and down the hall. Naruto's world had dropped out from under him. In the span of a few short weeks, it felt like he'd come undone at the seams, been torn asunder then stitched back together the wrong way. He knew he hadn't lost everything. Hell, he still had plenty to live for. Pyrrha, Yang, Weiss, Ruby, and the rest, to say nothing of his uncles and aunt. One mustn't forget Jiraiya, either. Hope was not yet lost. But, Dad. The idea, the very notion, that he'd just throw his life away out of the blue ... it didn't sit right with him. Minato wouldn't run off and die like that. He wasn't stupid. Dad was strong, invincible, unbeatable. Sure, his health wasn't the best these days with that illness of his, and maybe he wasn't as lively as he used to be, but still, silence was his only solace. So long as he denied it, so long as he refused to believe, there was hope. No matter what others might think, he'd come up here to the rooftops to get away from it all, from his own thoughts and doubts. The night air was cool against his skin, the wind a gentle lull through his ragged hair. It didn't bring him much peace, but he'd take what he could get these days, while he could get it. His sixth sense perked up. A door opened behind him. Footsteps echoed therein, shoes crunching across gravel. He needn't look to know who it was. Their presence was appreciated, but not unexpected. Did you need something, Ren? Ruby's teammate didn't approach. They'd never been close enough for that. It didn't stop them from trying, bless their simple soul. I know what it's like to lose a father. If you want to talk, I appreciate the gesture, but, he shook his head. Not now, Ren. He's fine. Has to be. Perhaps you should consider the possibility that, no, he bit out the word, then calmed himself. No. A shake of the head. You don't know my dad. He's probably gone undercover somewhere. Trust me, he wouldn't go out like this. Behind them, the door opened anew. More footsteps. Ren chortled softly. "It seems you have company. I'll let you be." He heard Ruby's teammate walk away, but his sixth sense still insisted someone was there. Who? He could only think of 3 persons who would willingly seek him out at this hour. One was Ruby, and she was absolutely, utterly incapable of standing still for this long. The other was Yang, and she would have said something by now. Which left? Against is better. Judgment, he turned to face the newcomer. Errors were made. Pyrrha? She had a strange look on her face. Why was she wearing her weapons and her armor? "What are you doing up here?" She didn't answer. He climbed to his feet, not liking the look in her eyes. "Oi, say something." Gloved hands grabbed his jacket, dragged him forward into her. Her lips met his, and she embraced him roughly, ruthlessly plundering his mouth with her own. Harsher than usual, an almost frantic desperation to it that had her tangling her hands in his hair. It concerned and excited him in equal measure. He yielded to her happily, only for her to dance backward when he tried to grab her hips. She slipped through his fingers with a shake of the head, plucked up her sword and shield from her back, and took up a stance. "Fight me." "Ha!" Laughter burst out of him. She didn't budge. Naruto balked. "Wait, you're serious, Pyrrha? I don't think that's a good idea." His face hurt. Why the hell did his face hurt? Blinking, he touched a hand to his aching nose. It came away bloody red. What? Her shield had BLD on it. His BLD. He hadn't even seen her move. Was he that unfocused? "Sorry, not sorry." His partner lowered her shield, wearing a fierce smile. "Wasn't asking. Fight me, or I'll beat you into the ground." He twitched. "Leave." "Nope." Damn it, now she was mimicking Ruby again. "You'll have to beat me for that to happen." "Now wait, just ag." She clocked him again, turning his words to an irritated growl. His head snapped to the side. "Stop." Blue eyes flashed red. "You don't want this fight." "Oh, I do." She slid her shield down over her wrist and struck again, folding him over a strong fist. "And so do you. Get up. I'm not stopping until I see the real you. We're going to get this, all of this." She grabbed a thumb when he tried to pull away. "Out of your system. Here and now. Tonight." "No." Naruto growled and clutched at his stomach. Another blow, rocking him on his heels. I said no, we're not doing this. I'm not going to fight you, or take my anger out on Thunk." His head snapped back. She laughed at him, sparking his temper. "Wrong answer." 1 punch. 2 3. He caught the 4th, twisting her fist in his hand. "I warned you." Green eyes sparkled with mirth. Had he just walked into her trap? Too late to do anything about it now. Pyrrha lunged at him. Finally, Naruto was still holding back. The realization somewhat soured Pyrrha's excitement somewhat as she fought for her life, cast a pall on what should have otherwise been a glorious fight between the two of them. It was her own fault, really. She'd come into this battle trying to make him angry, trying to evoke a response to snap him out of his funk, and she had, in a sense. But even with his anger roused, he yet limited himself, restrained himself. Even now he refused to fight her as an equal, and the worst part of it all, he was still beating her into the ground. Every move was a blur she barely countered. Each block rattled her bones, and every time he landed a blow, she felt her aura scream. She had been with him for years now, trained with him throughout it all, and it was nearly all she could do to keep up. If it weren't for her semblance, he would have knocked her out long ago and been done with it. Naruto didn't have a bit of metal on him tonight. She, however, on the other hand, had seeded her outfit with bits of metal tonight for this very purpose after all. His fist whistled in at her face. She flared her semblance and forced her arm up with speed it shouldn't have possessed. She grinned and kicked out, driving her heel into his ribs, sending him stumbling back. He touched a hand to his side. Scowled, now. Blue eyes narrowed upon her. He'd figured it out. Of course he had. He was a tactical genius when it came to combat. Polarity, the act of pushing and pulling that metal whichever way she wanted, gave her that much more of an edge in combat. More so now, when she could force her limbs to be where they needed to be in time. It was a trick she prepared especially for him, something she'd never used on anyone else. Against a juggernaut like Naruto, she needed that edge tonight, or he'd flatten her. It was both exhilarating and humbling and terrifying. It was far too late to do anything about it. The die was cast, the words said, and nothing could take them back. She could only weather the storm of Naruto's anger and fight for her life. He was absolutely furious with her. Not the murderous sort. Pyrrha knew she couldn't handle him when he truly went berserk, but the cold kind. He'd gone well past fire and straight into ice. His mind ran cold, just as hers burned hot. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the ruthless way he dismantled her at every turn, parried, riposted, and beat her down into the dirt. His skull embraced the ground. Aura flashed, flared now as she rolled away from a kick that would have surely knocked her out and given her whiplash besides. If only she had more power. The thought shouldn't have bothered her, but it did, knowing how far she had yet to go. She knew she was twice if not thrice as strong now as she would have been without him pushing her forward. She had surpassed her limits time and time again, yet here and now, when he let loose like this, it reminded her just how large the gap between them remained. How could she close it? Milo whisked in at Naruto's head, her sword seeking his chin, and when he parried that, she smashed Akuo into his face. Naruto tanked it, and the shield buckled with a squeal of metal. Not missing a beat, she slung her shield onto her back and swapped her sword to its spear form, driving him back in a storm of blows. He weaved between them all, a dancer on stage. Not a single strike touched him. He didn't mock her, didn't speak, or so much as say a word. When his counterattack finally came, Pyrrha barely got her guard up in time. His fist slammed into the butt of her spear and sent her skidding away. Her feet dug in, preventing her from flying clean off the rooftop, but only just. She raised her spear and grinned at him over it. "That your best?" "Enough," he spoke at last. "This is pointless, and you know it. Stop trying to make me clang." Angry, he finished with a snarl, catching her spear in his hand. "I mean it." She bashed her forehead against his. Aura cracked. He snarled and smashed a knee at her stomach, only for her to meet it with on of her own. The world dissolved into mindless violence once more. This wasn't a fight. It was a waltz, a savage rhythm that saw them blurring across the rooftop, their full physical potential on display, not a single movement wasted. Wasn't even a fair one at that. He fought on unarmed, while she had her sword and shield to hide behind. If he'd whipped out his chakra or clones, she knew she'd be in for a beating. But he never did. Even in his icy rage, he restrained himself. Pyrrha wasn't sure if she loved or hated him for that. Her answer came to her as his knee rocketed into her stomach. Breath burst from her lungs as she doubled over with a startled gasp. For anyone else it would have meant certain defeat. But she'd been taught to control her breathing and righted herself quickly. Naruto slugged her in the chest for it. Oh, this time the gasp was a pained one as she recoiled. "Right in the bub? Really?" A spark of concern broke through his anger. "Sorry," her temper sparked. No more apologies. She was so sick of that word. Sick of it. "Stop that," she hollered and kicked him in the groin. He grunted in pain, stance wavering for a moment. She took full advantage, decking him with her lance. Once, twice-ish just missed. On the third sweep Naruto dropped flat to the floor, allowing her javelin to whistle over his head. In the same instant he swept her legs and kicked her into the air. Her world went sideways. Down became up and up became down as she rocketed upwards. He reappeared behind her there, right fist SWNGNG back before she could hope to touch the safety of the ground. Well, this isn't grand at all. Pyrrha knew this move the primary lotus just as she knew what came next, but she had no real way to dodge it in the air. She turtled up behind her shield, flared her semblance, and prayed for the best. Wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. Crunch. Naruto's punch ripped Pyrrha clean off the rooftop, slapped her out the sky, and filled her ears with so much wind. She couldn't see where she was headed anymore. He'd hit her that strong, that fast. Long locks lashed at her face and, belatedly, she realized his attack had ruined her ponytail. A proper huntress would have whined and cried about getting their hair dirty. Pyrrha simply sighed, tucked herself into a, flared her aura, and there, by the brother god's good grace, she landed in a tumble and bounded up to her feet with only a bit of aura damage. Green eyes widened as she realized where she'd crashed down. Naruto hadn't simply slapped her off the rooftop. He'd knocked her clear into Beacon's courtyard. near the fountain at the main entrance at the cliffs. This was the very place they'd been flown in by airship not so long ago. But where was a shadow fell over Pyrrha. Against her better judgment, she dared to look up towards it. She saw Naruto above, silhouetted against the broken moon, one leg raised high. Her beloved fell upon her like a shooting star. A very angry star. A dozen voices fired in her head. One chief among them. Move, move, move. Pyrrha kicked off the ground and flung herself aside with a yelp. Just as well she did, too, because Naruto's axe kick ruptured the courtyard, creating a chasm between earth and stone. The dirt wasn't simply destroyed. It burst, kicking up a growing gesture to blind her. She felt some of the cliffside crumble away into the sea and gulped a little. Forget being knocked out. If she'd been hit by that, she'd have a broken. Well, everything. Do you understand now? Naruto ripped his foot from the dirt and glared up at her from the crater he'd made. You can't win. Stop trying to PSS me off. She really should. He might kill her if this continued. And yet, nothing would change if she gave up, would it? He'd go back to being in denial, hiding his pain behind a smile. She couldn't bear the thought. She'd do whatever it took to save him from that pain. Even if it meant she had to suffer a bit of it herself. Better to get all his frustrations out here, and now, burn off all that negativity and start anew. But how? Wuss. Naruto absolutely twitched. What was that? Pyrrha blinked. Touched a hand to her lips. She'd said that, hadn't she? Well, in Ferlian, as they say. I said you're being a wuss. She planted a fist on her hip, projecting bravado she didn't truly feel. Stop being a pansy about this, man up, and tell me how you really feel. Naruto exhaled slowly, a long shivering breath. Don't call me that, Pyrrha. What, a wuss? She forced herself to smile. Fine. You're not a wuss. You're being a. Take your S out of your purse and fight. Naruto didn't budge. All or nothing then. Hopefully he'd forgive her. She tilted her head and gave him the push he needed. Then I guess Minato was right about you. You really can't think for yourself. Naruto absolutely hissed. She dodged back the moment he did. It saved her life. She didn't see Naruto move, but she certainly felt what followed. An uppercut caught her chin and sent her flying through the air arse of elbow. She rocketed back into beacon, crashed through one wall, another now, and a third still. Finally she landed flat on her back, blinking black spots from her vision. She propped herself up on her elbows and blew a strand of scarlet hair from her face. Someone yelped above her. Pyrrha? Was that? She blinked black spots away from her eyes and craned her neck where she lay. Oh, hello, John. She mustered a bleary grin. I'm sorry. I'm not interrupting, am I? She most assuredly was, if Neo's relative state of undress was anything to go by. Also, she was sitting on said blonde's chest and glaring absolute daggers at her. Pyrrha felt that last bit was worth noting. Right. Those two were together, weren't they? She had almost forgotten. And was that Melanie and Milsha over there? Maybe someday she'd ask how that happened. A crimson claw burst out the smoke and grabbed her by the ankle. She gulped. Don't mind us, ladies. You too, John. Naruto's voice was a low growl. We're just working out some relationship issues. His piece said. He whipped her back outside into the moonlight. All hell broke loose. You want to talk about my feelings? A furious snarl filled Pyrrha's ears as she struck the ground shoulder first. Fine, have it your way. He was on her an instant later, raining down punches against her shield. It was all she could do to keep her arms steady and ward him off. Let's talk about my feelings. All my life I looked up to my dad, lived by his example. His fist thundered past her face, shaving away strands of scarlet when she didn't quite dodge in time. She ducked back and he gave chase. SWNGNG like a madman, all pretense of strategy lost. What he would say, what he would do, what was the right thing, all of it. He wailed on her and she took it, trusting in her shield to hold fast. I thought I knew who I was meant to be, but now he's gone and I can't. He reared back and punched down at her feet, cratering the earth as he launched her away. I'm lost without him. Pain pulsed through Pyrrha's left leg. She grit her teeth against it. Progress was worth a little pain. That's all right. She staggered upright, wiped a bit of BLD from her mouth, and smiled at him. We can be lost together. I'll protect you. High above them, the clouds parted and the light of the shattered moon fell upon them. It didn't reach Naruto. He stood in The shadows still, head bowed, shoulders quivering. I don't want to be protected. The words escaped him in a hoarse croak of a rasp, and in that instant Pyrrha saw it, a spark of scarlet light rising from his stomach. I want vengeance. I want to find whomever made Dad vanish, and tear them apart. I'll wring their neck, tear out their eyes, smash in their skull. Here at last he raised his gaze. His eyes were blue no longer. They'd gone slitted, scarlet. His gaze had become that of a beast. Dread dawned with it. No chakra cloak, not here. Beacon wasn't ready for that level of power, Naruto. Wait, do you even know what it's like? Pyrrha. His voice warped as he spoke, taking on a dark cadence that chilled her blood. To think you know who you are, only to realize your life's a lie? A single crimson tail of dark red light slithering into existence behind him. No, how could you? I helped you, I saved you, I plucked you out of that mess in Mistral, and you think you know me? That I want to be protected, saved. This was getting out of hand. That's not what I meant. A sharp crack of sound was her only warning. Then he stood before her. Naruto's forehead touched hers, and scarlet chakra smoldered against her aura, smoke spitting between them. You know nothing. Pyrrha Nikos. Don't panic. She had to calm him down. Quickly. I know enough. Trusting in her. Faltering aura to hold, she stepped forward and flung her arms around his neck. Drew him close now, heedless of her plummeting strength. Naruto stiffened. What are you doing? I know that we'll kill them, she whispered in his ear, crooning softly as she held him close. You, me, Yang and Weiss. We'll kill them all, everyone who took Minato from us. But before that I'll get stronger, not to protect you, but to stand beside you. Her hand came up to cup his cheek. To be your equal, I'll become so strong that you'll never need to be afraid again of losing me, yourself, anything at all. But I can't do that if you keep pushing me away. She drew back, holding his back with her other hand, grimacing a little as her gloves began to smolder. Let me in, Naruto. Let me help. Her aura was buckling against the fox's chakra. She felt it now, yet she didn't dare let go. Not here. Not now. And in return, I'll give you all that I am. My past, my present, my future. He made a strangled noise caught somewhere between a snarl and a sob. You'll die. Maybe not now, but someday. She smiled softly at him. Then I'll haunt you. Remember what I told you? I am yours, and you are mine. His fingers curled around hers. Oddly enough, her words seemed to mollify Naruto. The crimson chakra surrounding him guttered out, dissolving into wisps of red smoke. Yes. Lumped in her arms, and she caught him, kneeling against the ground. Tears stained her shoulder. She didn't remark on them. I'm just so angry. That's all right. She'd known he would be. Do you feel better now? His body sagged against hers. I'm tired. Sleep, then. She tucked his head into her lap. We can rest here until you feel better. How does that sound? He offered a rusty laugh in return. The teachers are going to be so PSS. We wrecked Beacon. I say, right on cue, she heard a most familiar shout. What is the meaning of this? Pyrrha smiled at Naruto, refusing to look away. Sorry, not sorry. She was certainly feeling sorry when Ozpin called her up to his tower the next morning. You wanted to see me, sir? Yes, Miss Nikos. Ozpin took a long drink from his mug. Please, come in. Her gaze flitted about the room, taking note of a scruff-looking man lingering by the elevator. She assessed him an instant, just as she'd been taught. Bright red eyes, dark hair, a silver flask in his hand, unconventional weapon at his back. Huntsman. Had to be. But why was he here? And why did he remind her of Ruby? If you don't mind me asking, sir, she looked back to the headmaster, why have you called me here? If it's about last night's fight, well, the less said about that the better. Dr. Ublek had slapped them with a month's worth of detentions and docked Team Wpin a grade besides. Weiss and Yang weren't terribly happy about the latter. Naruto was still sleeping off last night in the infirmary, and she'd barely had a chance to see him this morning before she'd been hauled up here. Ozpin beckoned. Take a seat. Reluctantly, she did so. Were they going to be expelled? She hoped not. What is your favorite fairy tale? Pyrrha blinked. Strong. Pardon? Fairy tales. The headmaster prattled on. heedless of her confusion. Stories from your childhood. Surely you must remember some of them. My childhood. Pyrrha flinched at the thought. She hadn't had much of one before she met Naruto, before she escaped father. I'd rather not think about that, if it's all the same to you. Ah, yes. Ozpin at least had the good grace to wince. I'd nearly forgotten. My apologies. Tell me then, have you heard the story of the seasons? Pyrrha recalled it vaguely. The one about the 4 maidens and the old man. Yes, winter, spring, summer, fall, the 4 maidens. The ghost of a smile touched her face. My mother loved that story. She missed mother. She'd give anything to see her again, better yet, to get her far, far away from father. Maybe someday she'd be well enough to live on her own again. The headmaster chuckled softly. Would you believe that story's been around since I was a boy? She quirked a crimson brow his way. Surely you're not that old? He couldn't be. Could he? Well, would you believe me if I told you it was true? His response drew renewed scrutiny and suspicion from her. What if I were to tell you there were 4 maidens in this world, beings of tremendous power, strong enough to control the very elements themselves? Pyrrha didn't like where this was going. Not one bit. Why are you telling me this? The headmaster steepled his fingers. Because I have a story to tell you, Miss Nikos, and one not at all pleasant. Against her better judgment, she listened. Ozpin told her the story of a girl named Amber. He told her it all. And at the end of it all she reeled backwards. If you take this power, Miss Nikos, you could better protect those you care for. Her eyes flashed. Do I look like I need your power? Yes, Ozpin's reply floored her. You do. All I ask is that you hear me out. I don't want it. She did, even if she was suspicious as all hell about it. What were the chances? She'd been quietly craving more strength to stand beside Naruto, and just after they fought, she was offered this. The timing was too good to be true, and if it wasn't. This girl Amber, what happened to her? She is dying. Ozpin hung his head. Though her wounds are most assuredly fatal, she managed to cling to the lion's share of her power despite being attacked. Power. Strength she could use to close the gap, the better to keep Naruto safe, and paint a target on her back. If I agree to this, I won't answer to you. She expected anger from him, disappointment at the very least. Something. Anything. Instead, he smiled. That smile worried her all the more. I should hope not. I drove Amber away. He shook his head, experience a bad memory. In my need to protect her, my longing to keep her safe, I indirectly caused the events that led to her doom. That's a lesson well learned and a mistake I shan't make again. Allow me to be clear, Miss Nikos. His eyes met hers as he steepled his fingers. I will not constrain you in any way. You may come and go as you please, and on the day you graduate, you are welcome to pursue whatever career you wish. I would only ask that you defend Beacon should it ever come under attack. That was all? Miss Nikos, may I be frank? She frowned. I thought you already were. I make no exaggeration when I say you're one of the strongest huntresses in this generation. Up came the mug again for him to drink from again. It did nothing to hide his smile. You could likely give Kuro here a run for his money. Huh? The drinking man scoffed. The kid's good, but she's not that good. Even if she did have that good, Itwashu's Minato teaching her, Pyrrha snapped her fingers. Kuro's weapon flew from its sheath and slammed into the ceiling, well out of reach. Hey, she glared at him. Talk poorly about him again, and your flask will join it. Why a little? Her right finger twitched. Kuro heaved a sigh. Fine, fine. I'll be good. Cheeky little bird. I learned from the best. Pyrrha preened as she released his blade. And don't think I'm blind to what you really want. From there she rounded on Ozpin, eyes flashing. You don't just want me. You want Naruto. It was easy to see. They were a package deal. You couldn't have one without the other. I admit, he would likely be inclined to help you, as would your friends, but no, my motives here are purely pragmatic. He seemed almost sad to say it. If there were anyone stronger, anyone better suited, anyone else of the proper age, you and I would not be having this conversation. Give it to Goodwitch, then. She's strong. I cannot. She is too old. Would you rather suggest one of your friends instead? His verbal riposte caught her off balance. Many of them were trained at the Leaf Gym, and quite skilled. They might prove suitable should you turn this offer down. Pyrrha's jaw clenched. Ozpin had her. He absolutely had her, and they both knew it. Even if she weren't considering the maiden solely for the power boost it offered, she would now to spare Yang and Weiss, if not Ruby and the rest. Taking this strength would make her a target to be sure, but better her than her friends. She was the strongest among them. Had to be her. Someone else might just die. Can I have time to think on this? You can? Ozpin's nod filled her with relief. His words stole that joy away. I would prefer your answer in the next 3 minutes. That's all? Your little skirmish last night spooked the ones seeking this power. A second attempt was made on Amber's life only some hours ago by masked individuals. Professor Port gave his life driving them back. She recoiled, and he paused to let the weight of his words sink in. Whether they were truth or a lie, she didn't know, and the distinction worried her. Miss Goodwitch and Dr. Oobleck is currently guarding her body, but we have no way of knowing whether there will be a third attempt. Time is of the essence. If we delay any longer, then we risk her power being ripped away right under our noses. Naruto would understand. Surely, she'd sworn to become stronger for him, after all. Have you made your decision, then? She had. I'll become a maiden, but not your maiden. I suppose the distinction matters. He shrugged and reached across the table. Shake my hand. Pyrrha eyed his open fingers like a quintet of vipers ready to bite. It felt like making a deal with a devil. Honestly, must all Minato students be so suspicious? The headmaster must have sensed her concern too, because he heaved a sigh. Be assured, I am not your enemy. I swear to you on my daughter's memory. That too was news to her. You have children? I did, once upon a time. His smile was small and sad, his eyes distant, lost in some awful memory. I would never use their names in vain. Oh God, she was actually considering this. If you betray me, I'll kill you. Kuro squawked. Hey, Ozpin didn't react. He considered her for a long moment. I dare say you would do a better job than most. Shall we? She shook his hand. There was no spark, no tingle of power, no sapping of her soul, nor a BLD oath sworn. Ozpin's hand was just that, a hand. She felt silly for fearing it in the first place. Excellent. Ozpin hopped to his feet and kicked up his cane under his arm. Come along, then. Pyrrha balked, made incredulous by his sudden declaration. Now. There's no time like the present, don't you think? Naruto awoke in his bed with a start. He looked left, right, now. Frowned. Where'd Pyrrha go? The human soul truly is a strange thing, isn't it? Many said aura was the soul. Perhaps it was. Perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps it was something else entirely, and everyone was horribly mistaken. Pyrrha couldn't claim to know either. Aura was aura. Soul was the soul. Nothing more, nothing less. Simple as. And right now, her soul was on fire. Power rushed into the pod into her, filling her every pore with liquid fire. Pain, pain, pain. It hurt. Agony unending. Torment unceasing. She'd screamed herself hoarse within the first minute, and still it didn't stop. Aura rushed into her, power not her own, the last dregs of a dying girl with nothing left to lose but her life. She saw things she'd never seen, experienced memories that weren't her own, sights, sounds, and smells, a looming loneliness so power she wanted to weep. Something brushed up against her mind, a faint, tired presence, little more than a feather's brush, and then she heard it, a girl's voice. So, Ozpin chose another. You're strong, if nothing else. She grit her teeth to bite back another scream. Who are you? The answer came to her a moment later. He'll use you as he used me. Amber's voice intoned. You've made a fool's bargain. Maybe she had, almost certainly, but it was the only one left for her to make. Pyrrha gritted her teeth and snarled. I am me. No one else. She would not be used. She refused to someone's tool. She was Pyrrha Nikos. No amount of foreign aura or memories could change that. She clung to her sense of self as her aura topped up and overflowed, using her own memories, her feelings as one might a raft in a storm sea. Faces, feelings, names. She began to chant them under her breath. Naruto. Weiss. Yang. Now the others, muttering them one after the other like a mantra, a prayer to keep herself sane as the slivers of a slain woman's soul fused with hers. That's the way. Remember those names. Amber's voice, or perhaps her ghost, offered one last ragged sigh. Don't die alone, Pyrrha. Live. Laugh. Love. The haze faded, and with it, the lid creaked open. Pyrrha forced herself to grasp the edge of the pod, using it to hoist herself upright. Ozpin was waiting there with a neutral expression and a helping hand. She slapped it aside, refusing to rely on him, and stumbled out to freedom, gripping her former prison for balance. Goodwitch and Oobleck awaited her only a stone's throw away, their faces carved from stone. No one spoke. No one breathed. She found her voice at last. Did it work? Kuro raised his flask high. See for yourself, Red. Pyrrha glimpsed her reflection in the glass lid of the pod. The mirror held her answer. Her eyes burned with green flames. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.